Okay, as chairman, I hereby call this Libertarian Seminar meeting to order. Today's presenter is going to be Justin Tucker, talking about libertarianism and welfare. And a couple of reminders: if you have any mobile devices that make noise, turn them off or silence them, and let's keep all the back and forth and the discussion respectful. Go for it, Justin.
Okay, so libertarian welfare is the topic. I just read Liberalism by Ludwig von Mises, and Ludwig von Mises had a quote that was like, he said, it was translated into English from German, but the English translation still quoted the Latin phrase that means contradiction in terms. So Mises said, liberal government is a, whatever that Latin phrase is, contradiction in terms. And I feel sort of this topic is sort of that way as well. Perhaps for, for some folks who are libertarians. Libertarian welfare, certainly, could it be a paradox? Well, the Libertarian Party calls for abolition of taxation and for public services to be financed voluntarily. This falls in line a lot with what Mises, Rand, and Rothbard advocated for. When they thought of welfare, they thought it was not a good idea, that it's something that the government should not do, reasons to be against it. So, for example, Mises thought you basically you have capitalism and you have socialism. Capitalism is mainly just protection of property. The government has just a few roles. Anything beyond that is socialism. And Rand and Rothbard basically agreed. And Rothbard more specifically thought that it was like a violation of private property rights. So the constitutional liberty is going to be a big focus of what we'll discuss tonight. So you have, there's this book written called Radicals for Capitalism, and our esteemed host has got a paragraph or so in there with his name in there in his book, From Marx to Mises. And also in this book, in the introduction, the author, Brian Doherty, basically says this book is mostly about 5 people. It's about Mises, it's about Rand, it's about Hayek, it's about Rothbard, and it's about Milton Friedman. And I called it the Big Five. Maybe he said that in the book, but for the purposes of me trying to write out this program, I called them the Big Five. But 3 of the Big Five do not agree with welfare in how we would normally define it. So, the Constitutional Liberty was written by Friedrich von Hayek. I think it came out in the early 60s. I didn't write down the year it came out. But I didn't read all of it, but I did read the welfare state chapters for this talk. And it was interesting to compare it to Liberalism by Mises, which I just read recently. And this book is basically, from what I understand, like I said, I haven't read it, but it's basically a philosophical statement by Mises to have if we're going to have a libertarian society, what would that look like? Constitutional liberty. Okay. When this book came out, here's what Rothbard had to say about it. F.A. Hayek's Constitutional Liberty is surprisingly and distressingly and extremely bad. I would even say evil book. So that was Murray Rothbard.
Wow.
However, and maybe David can fill me in on the background because I didn't completely research this, but Margaret Thatcher famously pounded on a table or whatever a copy of the book and said, "This is what we believe," I guess in regard to conservative party politics or the majority government at the time. So that was a positive endorsement by Margaret Thatcher. That's one of the other sort of things this book is known for. Whoops. And a few days ago, the book kind of came up on Twitter. The founder of Anthropic, Chris Olah, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, he's kind of disturbed about some of the events that are going on here in the United States, and he basically endorsed classical liberalism.
What's Anthropic again? I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's an AI company.
AI company, okay.
I'm not too familiar with it. I just really know the leader, co-founder, made this tweet in response to recent events.
Gotcha.
And so Kate Miller, who is the wife of Stephen Miller of the Trump administration, one of the head chuds in charge in our government right now.
Is this the one who's sleeping with Musk?
I don't know. I've never heard this. That'd be interesting if that were the case. But this is what she said in her tweet. If this is what they say publicly, again, talking about this guy endorsing classical liberalism, if this is what they say publicly, this is how their AI model is programmed. Woke and deeply leftist ideology is what they want you to rely on. Now, this tweet arguably got ratioed, and then it got community notes came to this tweet. The community notes said this: classical liberal democracy, which is what he professed to agree with, means the basic ideas America was founded on: personal freedom, people treated equally under the law, free speech, and government stays out of your life as much as possible. These ideas are closer to modern conservative views, not woke ones. Okay, I don't agree with all of that, but that's what the community note said. But certainly Kate Miller deserved the mockery that came at her. Now, there's this sort of neoliberal, pro-market Democrat. His name is Matthew Iglesias. He shared an image of the constitutional liberty, and his tweet said, "Stay woke, folks." So it's interesting. This book is kind of like sort of in the zeitgeist as we're speaking about this. Here's what Hayek had to say. All modern governments have made provision for the indignant, unfortunate, and disabled, and have concerned themselves with questions of health and the decimation of knowledge. There is no reason why the volume of the pure service activities should not increase with the general growth of wealth. There are common needs that can be satisfied only by collective action, and which can thus be provided for without restricting individual liberty. It can hardly be denied that as we grow richer, the minimum of sustenance which the community has always provided for those not be able to look after themselves, and which can be provided outside the market, will gradually rise. And that government may, usefully and without doing any harm, assist and even lead in such endeavors. There's little reason why the government should not play some role or even take the initiative in such areas as social insurance and education, or temporarily subsidize certain experimental developments. Comrade Hayek said that. Which now I can see now why Rothbard would say that that's evil, right? If I didn't tell you that was Hayek and told you it was Marx or whatever, Bernie Sanders, maybe you would possibly believe me. But that is what Hayek says in the Constitution of Liberty. He also says this: though the position that the state should have nothing to do with matters not related to the maintenance of law and order may seem logical so long as we think of the state solely as a coercive apparatus, we must recognize that, as a service agency, it may assist without harm in the achievement of desirable aims which perhaps could not be achieved otherwise. Comrade Hayek, again, making some pretty bold statements. So Hayek begins his series of chapters on the welfare state by criticizing socialism. And if you read Road to Serfdom, criticizes socialism is basically the point of that book. he was, at this point in the juncture, he was commenting that socialists are aware that Soviet-style communism is not good. The actually, like, trying to seize the means of production is a net negative on freedom. You know, even socialists know this. Even there's socialist critics of the Soviet Union. So instead, the focus, a lot of what socialists have done is just to increase the welfare state as opposed to flat out nationalization, socialization, or whatever. And he throughout these chapters he criticizes government taking control over sectors and this and that. So keep that in mind. He's not a fan of unions when unions use government to their advantage. I think that's pretty obvious libertarian position. But he did come out. He prefers there not have right to work laws. Hey, but he reluctantly accepts them in some cases because the government and unions are so sort of intertwined that maybe you need like a right to work laws, you know. He doesn't really elaborate on it too much. He doesn't really prescribe policy, but that's what he mentions. He also relents the fact that Social Security in the United States is sold as insurance, but it's really not insurance, obviously. I mean, you buy regular health insurance, you get an annuity, and then you have Social Security. Certainly they'd be different sort of things. And he thinks that the sort of blurring of these definitions is problematic. But he would prefer, instead of taxing people to pay for government insurance schemes, just not tax them and let people buy whatever insurance they need. But he does say this. There is little doubt that the growth of health insurance is a desirable development, and perhaps there is also a case for making it compulsory, since many who could thus provide for themselves might otherwise become a public charge. He didn't believe in government control of healthcare, but it sounds like he has sounds like that's Obamacare, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, he beat the Heritage Foundation by 13, 14, 15 years, because this is from about 1960.
Yeah.
And quite famously, we could do universal coverage through private care paper in about 73 or 74.
So Hayek goes on, or Hayek also says, the reasonable solution to these problems in a free society would seem to be that, while the state provides only a uniform minimum for all who are unable to maintain themselves and endeavors to reduce cyclical unemployment as much as possible by an appropriate monetary policy, any further provision required for the maintenance of the accustomed standard should be left to competitive and voluntary efforts. So he's not really, it seems like a very positive statement for certain types of welfare. He was not a big fan of progressive taxation for obvious reasons. For libertarians, would be against it. What we need is a principle that will limit the maximum rate of direct taxation in some relation to the total burden of taxation. The most reasonable rule of this kind would seem to be one that fixed the maximum assessable marginal rate of direct taxation at that percentage of the total national income which the government takes in taxation. This would also be the maximum rate of direct taxation of any part of individual incomes. If a national emergency made it necessary to raise this proportion, the maximum admissible rate would be raised to the same figure and would be correspondingly reduced when the overall tax burden was reduced. This would still leave taxation somewhat progressive, since those paying the maximum rate on their incomes would also pay some indirect taxes, which could bring their total proportion burden above the national average. Adherence to this principle would have the salutary consequence that every budget would have to be prefaced by an estimate of the share of the national income which the government proposed to take as taxes. This percentage would provide the standard rate of direct taxation of incomes, which, for the lower incomes, would be reduced in proportion as they are taxed indirectly. The net result would be slightly overall progression, which the marginal rate of taxation of this largest incomes could never exceed the rate at which incomes were never taxed on the average by more than the amount of indirect taxation. Sounds pretty silly and cumbersome and technical, and that's probably why I haven't really seen this argument much anywhere.
Well, I mean, Germany has a sort of apparatus like that, where there's a certain amount that they're allowed to borrow, for example. Like, I mean, it's on the debt side, not so much on the taxation side. It's kind of like a self-limiter in that, but especially with the war going on in Europe and Ukraine, they found creative ways around it. So, like, with all these ideas, the concept that I keep coming back to, or the thought that keeps coming back in my mind is, who watches the watchmen? Who's actually going out and defining, like, who's actually collecting the estimate of the national income? Is it the government who does so? How can the public push back on that? And so on and so forth. And so, who defines what the minimum amount or the minimum standard of some of these welfare programs should be? Like, we're going to end up in this cycle that we see now, where government gets to define that, and we continue spiraling out of control, and the welfare state grows because there's no actual enforcement mechanism for the public to act on that.
I will leave the conversation of Hayek and the Constitution of Liberty with this. In contemporary society, the case for compulsory education up to a certain minimum standard is twofold. There is a general argument that all of us will be exposed to fewer risks and will receive more benefits from our fellows if they share with us certain basic knowledge and beliefs. And in a country with democratic institutions, there is further important consideration that democracy is not likely to work except for on the smallest local scale with a partly illiterate people. The statist, what the H, Comrade Hayek. Doesn't Comrade Hayek know the difference between a republic and a democracy?
Grew up in a monarchy. What does he know? I kid. What do you?
Again, so that's a general overview of some of the discussion of the constitutional liberty, just the welfare aspect of it. I haven't read the rest of it. I'm gonna go back and start from the beginning, but
it's a long one. It's twice as long as. Yeah.
Oh, the welfare chapter is towards the end, and that's over 100 pages. And
Jesus.
But I highly recommend it. I think a lot of he's a native German speaker, so I think some of it translates into English very obtusely, but he's got a sense of humor, and I definitely recommend reading Hayek. So Hayek taught at the University of Chicago, and of course also did one of the other Big Five Libertarians, Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman wrote this book called Freedom and Capitalism. Or no, Capitalism and Freedom. I didn't write it down. But whatever, I think it's Capitalism and Freedom.
Yeah.
And it's a very provocative book. It's a much more... like liberalism by Mises and like the constitutional liberty, it is sort of like a manifesto of sorts for like liberalism. All three of them describe themselves as liberal. And in Capitalism and Freedom, Hayek, one of the things he advocated for was ending licensure for occupation. So there's little barriers for people to get into occupation, less people unemployed, this, that, and the other. In the book, he uses getting rid of medical licensure as the most radical example of this. And it's a very interesting argument, and he tells it on a very plain English sort of rendering of this. And he gives a lot of crazy, and I won't say crazy, he gives a lot of interesting policy prescriptions in this. This is where he also talks about school vouchers. So he, as a is education something that benefits society? And if it is, how can we do it the most efficiently and most compatible with freedom? And school vouchers were his solution to that. You pay taxes, you get some of that, and then you can go to... He did say that perhaps there should be a local government school, but that doesn't mean that there can't be other private schools that can take part of these systems. And he also mentions the negative income tax in Capitalism and Freedom. And this is sort of in line with a quote that I said earlier with Hayek. And I haven't read the book in years, but basically a negative income tax, you have a base amount. Let's say for just me, let's say it's 30 grand. If you make below 30 grand, you get a stipend from the government. And the closer you are to 30 grand, less of a stipend you may get. And then you hit 30 grand, and then everybody pays basically the same amount. That's your base. And what Friedman and several other libertarians who sort of support this or universal basic income will say is that you cut out the bureaucracy, you're giving the money directly to the people who need it, they know how to spend it better than what a bureaucrat would. You cut out the bureaucracy, and so there's that. But of course some libertarians might be like, well, comrade, that sounds like socialism or whatever. But Hayek, or Friedman, particularly, this is not in conjunction with current welfare state. This is to replace the welfare state. So this only can work, this only is a thing if we can not have the welfare state. We're talking about immigration before we started. Of course, there's that Friedman cliche, you can't have open immigration in a welfare state. I think that's, yes, I've heard that. It's an oft-repeated cliche, but Friedman actually has a more nuanced position. He actually praised illegal immigrants because they don't take welfare. And I'm sure being the son of immigrants, his experience is much better articulated beyond just that one thing that he says. I want to talk about Robert Nozick for a minute. I feel Robert Nozick is not as popular among libertarians, but Robert Nozick had this philosophy on just acquisition of property. You could acquire it and sell it, or you gift it, and those are kind of mainly the only just ways that you can acquire and get rid of property. But he also recognized that some property is held unjustly, and he called for what he called a rectification of past injustices. He doesn't really articulate how we can do this, or even if it's even practical, but he sort of puts it out there. And a lot of libertarians use that as sort of a justification for universal basic healthcare, universal basic income. How's it going?
Good, thanks.
And I want to close with the Dave Smith argument for the welfare state. And by the Dave Smith argument, I mean the logic that he put forth in his immigration debate with Alec Narasta. So, and I think that was my last topic that I did here. Dave Smith said basically that libertarianism orbits around voluntary exchanges, and we reject coercion. And thus, libertarianism should reject policies that drastically go against the will of the people. He doesn't say that this is an appeal to democracy. He calls it appeal to voluntarism. Okay, whatever. But basically, if the people, this is a quote, I'm quoting Dave Smith here. If the people of a country do not wish to have a large number of immigrants coming in, then it is not a voluntary transaction to force them, to force that on them. That is true, I guess, in some degree, assuming that the law, if the people of a country, I guess, completely are in consensus on this thing. But you can almost take any sort of, if the people of the country do not wish to X, then it's not a voluntary transaction to force that on. You can use that for anything. So one of the most controversial things that have happened in this new Trump administration is Doge, that cut things, and certainly the threats of cutting social welfare and whatever has caused people to panic and protest. And it's quite possible Republicans are not going to retain majority going into this midterm election. So, in a way, I guess you can also say, if the people of a country do not wish to have their welfare benefits cut, then it is not a voluntary transaction to force that on them. Adam, what's the most unlibertarian position you can think of that we haven't discussed? Or Gabe, give me one.
By any human?
Anything. Any anti-libertarian position.
Oh man, drug war.
If the people of a country do not wish to have drugs legalized, then it is not a voluntary transaction to force that on them. Gabe, give me an anti-libertarian position.
Oh man, I prefer to Adam on this one.
Conquering Latin America?
If the people of the country
Wish to conquer Latin
America,
privilege is
then it is not a voluntary transaction to force that on them. Give me one.
You could substitute Greenland, same idea.
Give me one.
Forced indoctrination into government schools.
If the people of a country do not wish to have forced indoctrination in government schools, then it is not a voluntary transaction to force that on them. But, I mean, are public schools that unpopular?
Parents like to have a place to
That's
put their kids.
a chicken and egg problem. They're
Or
propagandized.
you could rewrite the sentence. If the people want to have
Public schools.
subsidized public education and such as, damning supermajority, is it denying them the privileges of their supermajority?
Give me one. Give me one.
Income tax amendment.
If the people of a country do not wish to have an income tax amendment,
Or wish to have one.
Yeah.
or wish to have one, then it's not a voluntary transaction to force that on them. What's the most unlibertarian thing you can think of right now?
Well, I'm confused because it's up to the individual, not the group, right?
Yeah, but St. Dave of Smith, stand-up comic and podcaster,
All right.
went for the, but if the hypermajority
I'm
wants
sorry,
to
I'm
with
still
ethnic
recovering
nationalism.
from my trip.
To where?
Here.
Oh.
Well, if you can't think of one right now,
I'm
Justin, I'll
sorry.
give you one.
We won't
All right.
make you answer.
Continued illegality of sex work.
if the people of a country do not wish to have the continued illegality of sex work, then it is not a voluntary transaction.
Or they want the continued illegality.
Well, whatever it is. I think you guys got the point.
Yeah, keep it outlawed in Utah, keep it legal in Nevada.
And with that, I think I'm gonna end. But thank you for hearing my investigation into libertarian welfare.
I appreciate you trying to include me, but I'm just still recovering. So.
Oh, it's all right.
It was tough.
It's all good in the hood.
Snowy and.
It only took
and
me
cold.
2 hours to get here.
So
We
what
got-
do you think,
We got more bottles of wine than we
Justin?
got people. Just get comfortable.
Sounded like it was academic survey kind of presentation. How about your own ideas?
I think that the most voluntary means are preferable. However, that's probably not practical and probably not going to be realistic. If we are to have a welfare apparatus, I think it should be very decentralized, localized, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think decentralization is it's kind of creates conducive to libertarianism or the trend of libertarianism.
Yeah, you have, what is it,
As
50...
opposed to centralized big apparatus.
You can have all the states be their own laboratories of democracy or
Right.
whatever.
But decentralization will weaken the collective power in a competitive world unless you mandate, or if you're able to, the whole world being libertarian. Otherwise, those who are less libertarian will win the day, and libertarianism, albeit high ideal, you cannot survive to reach that ideal in the short term. So that's the biggest thing about, or biggest challenge or obstacle or killer of libertarianism is the short-term survival issue. If you can compete, you're going to be downgraded. If you're downgraded so poor, it doesn't matter if you're libertarian or not. If your even demise meets your demise, then it's a moot point. That's to me, it's the biggest challenge or even showstopper for libertarianism.
I mean, I guess a lot of libertarians are constitutionalists. So I guess you can say, well, the Constitution says we have a Congress can provide for the general welfare.
Then you're having it both ways. You're moving away from libertarianism for the survival of libertarianism.
Or maybe libertarianism is the, voluntarism, in a voluntarist sort of expressions through democracy. Maybe if, enough people think that welfare is worth having, they're going to vote for that stuff and sort of offer their consent
also
to...
anti-libertarianism, because you have the majority ruling the minority. That's not libertarianism. That's democracy, but that's kind of what's called dictatorial kind of democracy, like mob
Well, we
rule.
don't have that.
It's a mob rule. I think one of
We don't have that in the United States or anywhere with modern democracies, really, do we?
Well, we don't have
Well,
a
the United
democracy.
States, certainly, we don't have that.
It's a republic. It's not a
It's a
the
mob
democracy.
rule.
Well,
It's
this
a
goes
mob
back
rule.
to when I said, "Hey, Hayek, didn't you know the definition between, the difference between the republic democracy distinction is purely semantic and silly."
Yeah, a little bit.
And
We don't direct
I
both.
think
A
when
little
people
bit.
it's just what does when anybody says that they profess to be for democracy, do they mean the majority beats the minority? No, they mean like classical liberal democracy.
Well, democracy is the procedure.
The democracy
Republic
that Hayek
Republic
and
is
were
a
about.
structure. Republic is a structure. Democracy is a procedure. It's like you hide and wait.
But republic
Those
is,
are not interference.
republic is an absence of monarchy.
That's
more than
the real
anything else.
definition, yeah.
The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they're not a constitutional democracy. They're not a representative republic in a way that people from Western, classical liberal or social democratic societies would have recognized. But they use the word republic because it wasn't a hereditary monarchy.
Yeah,
they had
that's
overthrown.
exactly right.
And Mises
Exactly right.
defined freedom.
Republic's
Mises
pretty
defined.
open-ended.
Yeah, exactly right.
And in liberalism, Mises defined freedom as abolishing slavery. I mean, that's another so it,
Well, if you're subject to the laws that other people pass, that's a form of slavery, isn't it?
Oh, well, you broaden the definition.
well, it depends. I guess it's how you define slavery.
Yeah.
I think most people define slavery as being forced to work without pay. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dave.
because you have to
If not, I'll take it.
abide by some federal regulation. Does that mean you're a slave? I don't know.
Well,
The objectivists, Ayn Rand's group, were openly against democracy. They thought it was a very scary. Leonard P. Coffey, he thought it was one of the scariest. They didn't believe in. They're very individualist, and they didn't believe in democracy.
That guy's a weird.
Yeah, on the record, I don't believe in democracy either.
What do you
I have
read?
no problem with that. Huh?
Well, we found it incompatible. Sorry.
Yeah.
Nice.
Get out of here.
And
In
I'm not a
America, we like democracy,
I'm not a
buddy.
libertarian. I never tried to pretend.
Well, in China, how do you?
Well, the
become a
Big
member of
Five, most of the Big Five were, 3 of the Big Five were little case Democrats. So maybe if the Big Five agree in democracy, then I guess.
Well, I'll also poke on what they professed versus what they then did in practice. So Rand, when people think about what Rand believed in, and then when it came time for example, the final decade or so of her life, whether or not she would support the Libertarian Party, she said, oh no, that would take votes away from Nixon. That would take votes away from Reagan. You know, even though she wasn't too enthusiastic about Nixon or Reagan, she didn't want to give in to the anti-war, anti-socialist hippies. You know, if these were the hippies of the capitalist movement in the Libertarian Party, she had no interest in them whatsoever.
Anti-socialist hippies?
She called libertarians the hippies of the right.
Yeah, they were the dope-smoking right, you know,
Oh,
the
okay.
anti-war right, the anti-Vietnam War long hair right. Okay, so
Carl Hess.
she wouldn't put up with them, but that meant that she would sign off on, in effect, you know, Goldwater, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and then she's dead.
So that's our thing with our duopoly system where,
But it's a choice though.
She actually
could've
thought
jumped ship with the others.
she thought that one single issue coalitions were better than political parties. So she was probably looking at who was like the best capitalist or who was the best whatever.
Well, and she had semantic nonsense like the only people who influenced her. David, you talked about this when you spoke at the College of Complexes, where she said the only people who influenced her were like Aristotle and
That's pretty
others.
obvious.
But then it's nonsense if you look at her actual biography with the other pro-capitalist, proto-libertarian, anti-New Deal intellectual circles from Garrett Garrett and Albert J. Nock and Isabel Patterson and Rose Wilder Lane. If she's quoting Mises in her newsletters, but he doesn't influence her. I'm calling kind of bullshit on her notion of that she's the self-created genius who isn't quote-unquote influenced by anyone else if you have to quote Mises's arguments in your objectivist newsletter. And then you toady up to the GOP when it comes to possible third-party bolting away. Like there's something in practice that doesn't match the advertising slogan.
And then you also see this all. You talk about you have the Rothbardian movement going Pat Buchanan.
He even settled for George H.W. Bush in 1992 after Buchanan lost that primary. He settled for an old New England.
Who did?
Rothbard. He said, "This is your last chance to stop the bums." I think was the title the LA Times gave the column.
this is the United States in our duopoly. You know, I don't like Trump, but I really, really, really hate Hillary.
But this was Rothbard having just left the Libertarian Party after 18 years because his side didn't win the chair's election in 1989, and then they all bolted in 89 and 90.
I think there's a big difference between basic principles and kind of tactical calculations.
Fair enough.
And, you know, I mean, you can be wrong in your tactical calculations, but right in your basic principles, or of course you could be wrong in both. So, you know, I think a lot of this is inconclusive. I mean, I'll just say this. I think that I don't think anybody has ever claimed that Hayek was a libertarian. Certainly, libertarians never thought that in the 60s and 70s.
Libertarian Party sharing memes of quotes of Hayek. Yes, libertarians think he's a libertarian.
No, they do not. They do not. Absolutely not. I mean, they share memes with all kinds of people.
Yeah.
You know, that's sharing memes is not being. I mean, Hayek himself wrote something about why I'm not a conservative.
Yes, that's the end of that book.
Yes, I've read that before.
But he did not say I am a libertarian.
Yes,
and in fact,
that's
he
true.
was not a libertarian. But I mean, that doesn't mean that libertarians weren't influenced by him and found a lot of his ideas very interesting.
If somebody does not self-profess to be something, does that mean they're not that?
Hayek-tarian.
Well, what Hayek said was that he didn't like the word libertarian because it was unwieldy.
But it wasn't just that.
He wanted to reclaim the word liberal, and if that couldn't be done, the most underwhelming conclusion was to reclaim the word Whig.
Hayek said he was an old Whig. He repudiated liberalism and he repudiated conservatism, although I think he would have agreed. He was quite close to classical liberalism in many ways. But he preferred to say he was an old Whig. And of course, the big difference there is that an old Whig is someone who has a great respect for what has evolved traditionally in society, whereas a classical liberal tends to be, we're going to remake society, from the ground up, starting with a blank slate. We're going to decide what is the ideal society, and we're going to make, and then we're going to adopt policies that make society move in the direction of that ideal. And I personally think that one of the very confused and mistaken elements in Hayek is his respect for traditional grown institutions. I think ultimately it's indefensible. And I think you do have to have a theory where you start with a blank slate, you start from the ground up, and you say, what is the ideal kind of society, how does it work? But then you have this other thing which has influenced me more and more in recent years. I used to be a kind of Rothbardian, not in philosophy and economics even, but just in thinking that anarcho-capitalism was the way to go. And I think a lot of people were like me in that respect, and a lot of people who were like me in that respect now very much support immigration controls and other. I think there are all these tactical things, and you can get people who want the same thing but have different policy prescriptions because they have different theories about what will work and how you will get there. The thing that has most influenced me in recent years has been I've woken up to something I was always aware of, but I never took the full force of it, which is that if there are certain things that are just not going to happen in, let's say, the next 200 years, then you shouldn't make that part of your political program, and you should try to find something that will work and will move in the right direction. So that's my, and there was a time in the history of economics, I don't know if it's gone on, but in the 70s, I think it was, there was a flurry of interest in what was called the general theory of the second best. Given there are certain things we would like to see from a welfare economics point of view, the optimal welfare economics outcome, but we're not going to get those for one reason or another. What's the second best? And that's more and more the way I think, and that's why I voted for Trump.
I think it's a lot of what Hayek's thinking.
You're into a pragmatic thing.
Well, I still want to argue about what would be the best in the ideal world. I still think that's important to have that theory and keep that theory developing.
And push you over to window.
And I don't think that Hayek disagrees with you either.
Everyone wants to end hunger. But...
Right.
And I don't think Hayek disagrees with you either. And you were talking about means. It's probably like it's not the ends, it's the means. And I think that Hayek does. I think Hayek would probably agree with what you just said.
Yeah, but the thing is, of course, contrasted with socialism, we're all on the same side as Hayek, right? I mean, we all want private property and money making to be at least legal in many circumstances, right? And we all think that would be, if there was more of that, it would be an improvement. So there is this great, you can say there's free market conservatism or whatever you want to call it. There's a kind of range of positions which are in practice quite compatible. In terms of political practice, they're quite compatible.
Yeah, I think going back to the quotes that you had from Hayek, I have to say that I disagree with almost every single one. Out of principle, because like tying together some ideas from David and others, Hayek's ideal outcome based on those quotes, right, taking them to the logical conclusion, requires the best of human nature in terms of the people who are overseeing said system, said welfare system, when I would personally much rather have an anti-fragile system that guards against the worst of our impulses, because if you don't get the ideal outcome and you settle for second best, we've kind of seen how that plays out. Second best ends up, being quite a ways away from that ideal outcome that Hayek's looking for. So, color me skeptical, but it's surprising, because I didn't know that Hayek had that opinion. To be fair, I haven't read too much, especially from that book, but yeah, I think human history shows, time and time again, that it's much better to have a system that guards against the worst of what we can do than to have a system that depends on the best.
Brian Doherty in Radicals for Capitalism actually says something along the lines of, perhaps Hayek would have changed his mind if, he knew that blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I do think this. I mean, there was a time when I read a lot of Hayek, and was very much preoccupied with Hayek, and I this was back in the 70s and 80s. Hayek, I don't know if Hayek would have admitted this or said this, but I think it's very clear that he wanted to have a real effect on policies, government policies in the world. He didn't want to just, he really didn't want to espouse positions which were never going to have any influence because they were so remote from the way people think. And part of this was, whenever he talks about the virtues of the market, he always throws in a remark about how we don't want laissez-faire. And I think you can tell that the reason he does that is that he doesn't want to frighten people away from saying there is an essential role for the market, and that certain socialist ideas about how you can replace the market or curtail the market are based on economic fallacies, right? So instead of thinking in terms of what would be the perfect world, he's thinking in terms of what would be the best candidate for a viable policy that would at least safeguard certain fundamental things, like
Pragmatism.
Well, I don't think he was a pragmatist at all, but I mean,
But his choice of approach.
I don't think Hayek was in the least a pragmatist, but I think he was someone who, like Milton Friedman as well. Milton Friedman pushed for the pay-as-you-go income tax, right? Because given the way people were thinking, he thought that would be the best thing. And of course, they're not quite the same, because Friedman had a kind of technocratic element. It's his job to be an economist and to say, as an expert economist, what's going to happen. Whereas Hayek had a rather different view of that. But they both have this idea that they expect to have some influence at the centre of policy making. And Hayek doesn't want to frighten people off. I mean, that's very clear. And when in his old age he started advocating a free market in money, there was a kind of liberation there. At last he was allowing himself...
I love those arguments he makes for that.
Allowing himself to come out with something that was so off the wall in terms of the way people were thinking. He was indulging himself in something he'd always curtailed. And I remember, actually, I met Hayek a few times, and I don't mean I met him personally, but I was in the same room with him when there was discussions going on. And somebody said to him, well, what do you think about this idea of Murray Rothbard, of anarcho-capitalism having everything, including national defense, done by private companies? And Hayek said, oh, in my youth, that's the sort of thing I would have been delighted with, but you know, and that was all his life. He'd been trying, because he was once a very eminent person who was taken very seriously, and just before the deluge of Keynesianism, because he wouldn't go along with Keynesianism, he was sort of made a very insignificant figure. But you know, there was when he wrote Prices and Production, and he was at the London School of Economics, he was taken very, very seriously. You know, as people like Lionel Robbins took him very seriously, and Lionel Robbins was someone who's an advisor to governments and so on and so forth. So much an advisor to governments that he wasted his intellectual talents on being an advisor to governments, which is a great trap to get into. You know, but Hayek, I think, Hayek sort of struck everybody who met him as a very self-contained, self-possessed person. But I think there was this inner struggle between being an intellectual rebel and really being annoyed with some of the nonsense that certain socialists were coming out with, and the desire to not frighten people off, you know. Well,
I guess that's the reason why him and Friedman got the Nobel Prize, and Rand and Rothbard and Mises don't.
Can I have a time period of when this book was written?
Early 60s, right?
I think it was published around 1960.
Yeah, I didn't write down the year.
Capitalism and Freedom, I think, was 62, and that was a series of lectures.
So this is before Lyndon Johnson's Great Society?
I think so, yeah.
But after Graham Wallace's Great Society.
Let me look it up just to be sure.
So he was there for the FDR New Deal, but he hadn't yet seen the Johnson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I almost, when I'm listening to David, I keep thinking about utopia, you know, this super ideal, and no, utopias really don't exist, and let's be in the real world and deal with, you know, flawed human beings, etc., you know, that you had to deal with what was here. And I guess that's why I used the word pragmatism, that he didn't, this super pure
lowercase p pragmatism.
Not like John Dewey.
But that's how socialism keeps hanging around, is like these utopian ideas and ideals. These people think it's pragmatic to be socialist, right? You know, Mamdani and all the...
I think part of capitalism is, I'm an asshole, you're an asshole, we're both selfish.
So let's make money together.
Assholes. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
No, I have selfishness, you have selfishness, right? You
Let's
know,
have
we're
it
not
equally, mutually exchanged.
Realistic, and you know, we're all greedy. We're all greedy.
Yeah, I think the problem with libertarianism, and like it's existential to a certain degree, is like it's just hard to go up against these utopian ideas, because we're preaching pragmatism, right? Ultimately, like recognizing reality, and the reality of the situation is we're all assholes. So let's all just like individually come up with stuff ourselves and then trade amongst ourselves and all that kind of stuff, right? But it's hard to say like, oh, housing's a universal right. You know, like you should have a livable income. Those sorts of things. Like it's hard to continually go against those ideas and win the mind share and win the hearts and go ahead and ultimately win elections that way.
There's a term that I've heard just recently. I don't know when it first came out or when it first entered the zeitgeist or whatever, but it immediately struck me as like an absolutely necessary, perfect term that is extremely useful. Empathy trap. Empathy trap. So like, all the stuff you're talking about is an empathy trap, because if you say something like, well, I think people should have a right to health care, it's an empathy trap, because the moment you say, well, I don't know, I don't think about that. What do you mean? You want people to die on the street? You know, that kind of stuff. It's an empathy trap. That's why it's so hard, is because people can just take the, as Scott Adams might say, take the persuasion high ground, set an empathy trap for you, and then if you say things like, "Oh, I don't think healthcare is a right," then they can snap that trap on you and say, "Well, then you're just a bad person because you think people should die on the street."
You could also flip it.
You think that there shouldn't be government food pantries, so you think people should starve. Like, it's empathy traps all over the place. I think that's a big reason why it's so difficult, is because there's empathy traps, and they know that they're laying them. They know it.
Agree.
And this is why the 19th Amendment needs to be repealed.
But there's a strange symbiosis between two kinds of leftists. You know, the Marxists who exist today in sociology departments and places like that, they're equally scathing about sentimentality and sort of kindly feeling being a basis for anything. They're very scathing about that. They really reject it strongly.
Mm-hmm.
But you do have the sort of hordes of the infantry of the left, as it were, the people who don't think much. They're the people who are all into empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But the more austere intellectuals, they don't like empathy. Because they're eager to emphasize, if you get them into a corner, that they're scientific materialists who have no illusions.
Yeah, I mean, respectfully, I disagree about the point about the 19th Amendment, but
Oh, I know.
for me personally, it's more about if someone ever says, like, "Oh, you're not empathetic," like along the points that you made, like, "Oh, you want people to die in the street, this and that." I say, no, I'm not necessarily empathetic, but I am sympathetic. I prefer sympathy over empathy, right, if you look at the definitions of those. But I agree otherwise, like, yes, those are landmines to navigate. And the thing is that most people don't want to put in the time and the effort to understand why popular positions are not feasible or workable. Like, they just want stuff given to them or told to them. Right? So it's just an uphill battle both ways. Like, to try to, make your point and also, like, increase the amount of territory politically with our ideas. So.
Yeah.
And yet, if you contrast the position today with the position 50 years ago, many of the things which libertarians had to argue strenuously for are now taken for granted. Well, they're taken for granted by practical people. And you see, I mean, to me, one of the great testimonies to this is the total success of capitalism in Russia and China. Total success. I mean, I know a lot of right-wingers in the US like to talk about communist China. That's all nonsense. There is nothing communist about China.
Look at me.
It's
a socialist.
Except the name. It's like Christian Europe or something.
Socialist.
It doesn't mean anything.
Change the name.
Nothing.
Occidental.
There is nothing socialist about China. It is a sort of capitalism in the
Gotta
clearest
be just a
possible.
little.
Capitalism in the
You don't
clearest.
have one single EV car maker. You have a multitude of
Yeah,
different.
no, I mean, it's not
We
worth
talked
arguing
about
about.
this.
It's
We talked about this.
capitalism. It's just as capitalist as the United States, and it's not pure capitalism in an Ayn Rand sense, of course, but it's just as capitalist as the United States. Now, so in that sense, practical policymakers the world over have come to accept things which elite intellectuals 50 years ago would strenuously dispute. So there has been a big shift in the direction of accepting capitalism, accepting markets, accepting money, accepting the necessity for differences in income to provide incentives. There really has been a tremendous fundamental shift. And it's been, looking at myself and what I thought, it's been a shift in my direction. You know, when I was writing my first book, From Marx to Mises, I had in mind people who mattered a lot then but they don't matter anymore. You know, they've lost that hold on the opinion of intellectuals, I suppose, and because the opinion of intellectuals ultimately influences heavily the opinion of journalists and media people and communicators and persuaders, there has been, you know, if you look at the world as it seemed when there was in the Cold War, when you had these two great systems, Western capitalism and the Eastern communist bloc, and it seemed as though that was a genuine alternative, which might win. You know, and nobody thinks like that anymore at all, or at least only very superficial-minded people who don't think like that. Most people just realise that you've got to have a financial system, you've got to control the money supply or you're going to get hyperinflation, all those kinds of common sense things that we were struggling for, to get people to accept. Everybody who matters now accepts.
That not all heavy industry should be nationalized.
Right, yeah. Or just the idea that nationalisation is a cure-all, you know, which was so dominant among progressive-minded people 50, 60, 70 years ago.
And I wasn't alive for a good chunk of that, but it was my sense that, to be fair to Hayek and Friedman, the sort of, you know, relatively more free market argument, but not a purist free market argument that they were advocating during the Cold War, is part of what turned that tide in public thinking, and not Murray Rothbard throwing a tantrum or, you know, something like that. You know, they really did move that goalpost.
They got the closest to power, and I think made the most. Those two were certainly the most, I think, influential because they were able to convince people in power of libertarian ideas. No, even if they couldn't implement those as purely as libertarians want them to do it.
Yeah, I suggest, because this is a never-ending debate, and it's interesting. That's why I put together, whether China is capitalist or socialist, right? I put together to have fun on purpose. I've purposely not to straighten out the definition, because it's just for fun, right? So we can continue to have fun. But I propose to the world, instead of saying capitalism or socialism, then you get into semantics. You have to define before you say anything. If you don't define, you go ahead and say anything, you just go endlessly like talking over each other, right? So I propose, instead of talking capitalism or socialism, we talk about pieces, like the market mechanism is a piece, as opposed to market mechanism as a part of this capitalism, as a part of socialism. No, we just talk about market mechanism, or talk about control of money supply, central banking, that sort of thing. Or talk about state-owned enterprise versus private-owned enterprise. We talk about pieces instead of talking about the whole thing, because pieces is easier to define. It's so easy that we don't even have to define what's market mechanism, right? Then we can move our way up when we talk about like aggregate, right? We put this piece together and this system. Don't name it like socialism or capitalism. Then we go back to the trap. So my proposal is we talk about pieces. We talk about, then we can aggregate, move up. Still avoiding calling it capitalism or socialism or communism. That's so 19th century, 20th century talk. We should move to 20th century and act and talk as is.
You see, the problem with that, there are many problems with that, apart from the total and ineradicable confusion involved. And the problem is that there's a huge number of people, and I know because these are people whose views on foreign policy I tend to agree with. You know, people like Alexander Mercouris, all those kinds of people. Jeffrey Sachs. I tend to agree with them on geopolitics, foreign policy. And they will talk sometimes about Russia, China, Iran, Vietnam, South Korea, North Korea, Europe, United States, Brazil. They'll talk about these things in a way which I'm agreeing with them all along. And then suddenly one of them will say something like, American capitalism is suffering from a tremendous crisis. Or American capitalism is a declining empire, or whatever. And it's quite clear that they don't understand that in all significant respects, China and the United States are identical. And it's utterly misleading to suggest that that America is capitalist in a sense which other major countries in the world are not. They're basically, Iran and China and Russia are the same fundamental system as the United States, the same fundamental system as Brazil, the same fundamental system as Europe. You know, they all have the same fundamental economic system, and that has to be understood. It's all very well talking about pieces, but the point is, the big assemblage of pieces is identical. There's no difference.
About common denominator.
There's no difference.
Common denominator is in terms of pieces, because mathematically, when you calculate common denominator, you're breaking down the number. That's my idea. Talking about pieces instead of an aggregate. Aggregate, you fall into the trap. What is capitalism? Which part is capitalism? Which part is not? Is it how pure it is? 80% pure, 20 carats, or?
But 50 years ago there was no dispute. Well, there was dispute about minutiae, but there was no dispute about, but essentially what capitalism was.
Because 50 years ago was the 20th century. That's exactly my point. We don't want to, in 21st century complexity, talk in terms of 19th century and 20th century notions.
But time is not really divided by 21st, 20th century.
Well, roughly, you can see the
That's
evolution.
That's a human construction.
I know, you can see the evolution. This 10 years is...
All because it happened 25 years ago doesn't...
How this decade...
Order.
How this decade different from 5 decades ago. We can see the difference. I grant it. I know it's the line between 20th and 21st century is artificial, but it's a figure of speech. I'm talking about eras. I'm talking eras. I'm talking about evolution of time.
You think it's different now than it was in 1960?
In many ways. I already said that.
I'm not going to disagree with you that it is in many ways.
Age, if nothing else.
I just think the problem is I don't find many people who think differently than me who are willing to argue the bits and pieces.
I am going to right now. So we have China, and we have electric vehicles. You don't have one single state-owned entity that creates electric vehicles. You have multiple different companies. BYD, NIO, I can't pronounce it.
Xiaomi and
Huawei.
Many companies.
Camry, something like that.
Li Auto.
Yeah, so many.
Li Auto, thank you.
So
but you have these multiple different competing firms that are competing in the electric vehicle market. That being said, you do have a heavy government hand that the government will subsidize. Like NIO, I know NIO would have been bankrupt already if the government hadn't.
NIO, I think, is Korean, right?
NIO, I thought
was...
NIO? Yeah, NIO.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
NIO, that you do have government propping up of these companies.
Legitimately. No one will fault the government for that policy. Yet, U.S., that policy will be controversial. Right? So what's the difference? If I may say, you have to say, if I had to go back to the old debate, the age-old debate, or it's capitalism versus socialism. But I want to get past that. That's why I advocate. I propose there's a piece by piece argument.
With the EV market.
Right. What you're saying is market mechanism. And the other piece of it, government maybe started this industry by controlling and subsidizing via subsidy is different. The way of subsidy is different from the U.S. It's from the banking. The government controls the banking. If the government favors a certain industry, it will let the bank, the policy to finance that industry more easily. That's a way, a Chinese way of subsidy. So that's how they start. Yeah.
Back in the day, Alexander Hamilton he was different than Thomas Jefferson. It was kind of sort of his nemesis, but
Jefferson was right, by the way.
But Hamilton was in favor of government propping up businesses, whereas Jefferson was.
What's the Constitution?
Yeah, even back then, you can see the signs of talking in pieces. Well, for people who are ideologically pure-minded, they would say, "Oh, that's not pure capitalism. That's not pure libertarianism. That's not pure this and that." I say, let's get past that. Okay, already. We just talk pieces, and we'll put pieces together. Forget about socialism, capitalism. That's 19th century terminology.
And I mention EVs because I think that China will be the dominant EV. China's going to be what Japan was.
The dominant economic power.
Well, if enough people feel we need to subsidize EV in the United States, then I guess that's a voluntary acknowledgement that we should do that.
Well, there's a lot of different things being smudged together like this, which is what happens when you listen to Eric.
Well, also, I'm fascinated by the EV.
I mean, the thing is, look, China's doing very well, and I think will continue to do very well for decades to come. But of course, it will then run into trouble because people in government will do things that screw things up and cause recessions and other problems.
I think China's in trouble now.
They build all these buildings that are empty.
I said it's transitioning. Down, right? It's transitioning.
I don't think.
Of course, you
hit trouble.
Order. David was in the middle of some commentary.
I'll put myself in the queue as number 5 for a question about China.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who love to say that China is in trouble. It's a lot of nonsense. China is doing very, very well and will continue to do very well for decades to come. However, there's a sense in which, there is a phrase that used to be very common in development economics, the advantages of backwardness. When the government is always incompetent to decide which industries should be subsidized and which should be curbed or circumscribed. That's a given. The political ruling class never understands the economy, never. But they do have an advantage when you're suddenly unleashing the market, which has been suppressed, and you're very backward, and therefore you're catching up and doing a lot of things that have been done before. And of course, also doing things that clear-headedly, it's easy to see are improvement on what was done before. So right now, China's doing very well and will continue to do very well for some time to come. They've got problems, of course, but every country has problems.
Yeah, we all do.
But the time will come when, maybe 20 years from now, when I will be mouldering in my grave.
Oh no, you're gonna live another 30 years, Dave.
Cyber Dave.
Easy.
China will run into trouble. Japan used to be. There was a period where everybody was stunned by Japan, and they thought,
the late 80s.
This is a miracle, and there was actually a best-selling book called
Japan Number 1.
That's right, Japan at number 1 ? And meaning it would have a GDP in excess of the United States.
That's right.
Well, now, according to PPP, China is number 1. According to PPP,
since
China is number 1 and Russia is number 4.
And Japan's having a lot of
And Japan is below
Japan
Russia.
needs to join the United States.
Japan is now below
52nd
Russia
state.
using
Like-
PPP. Anyway,
You're half Japanese and
Yeah,
Canadian.
you're right.
Chinese, half Chinese.
so the thing is, the ruling class always screws up when it comes to when they think they can, in some way, modify the workings of a market economy. They cannot, because the market is wiser. I'm speaking metaphorically, of course. The market has no consciousness any more than AI has any consciousness. But the market is wiser than politicians always. So, you know.
Hayek would agree.
Right, of course, I got it from Hayek. I'm agreeing with Hayek. But, you know, we should remember some of the brilliant stuff Hayek did, like especially the paper, The Use of Knowledge in Society, which is so absolutely brilliant, and which is basically an elaboration of Mises.
I have a copy of it in my book bag.
Right,
So let me introduce.
Wait, hold on, hold on. Let me hit a couple of different people because I think there was a whole bunch of
Some of the weak
crosstalk.
and the damned were waiting.
Yeah, you were gonna say something, Joe, weren't you?
I thought I more or less did. I was
Okay.
saying that China is they have built all these residence towers, I guess, and
Ghost
evidently
cities.
they're yeah. Right.
I've seen them.
That doesn't mean that China's falling apart. It just means that
That's
they're
true.
not
That it
perfect.
could be a construction boondoggle that reaches
Yeah,
its limits.
yeah. I didn't mean to suggest they were falling apart or anything. No.
No, yeah, I
and
was-
I agree. Electric cars, they seem to be doing very well.
My niece has got a nice electric car.
I don't know. Is there anyone else in between us waiting?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of do that.
Do the magic.
Did you have anything?
I will yield it to other people.
I'll let Adam go first.
All right, Aaron.
And then
I'll try and
I'll see if
pass-
I can.
I'll pass the
Riff on
baton
it.
back at some point. Yeah, I mean, I'd heard this to sort of piggyback on the last comments. Right, sir, what's your name again? I know I met you once or twice.
Joe.
Joe. Good to see you again. I'm an infrequent flyer, but I make it a few times a year. Usually when Justin is the speaker.
And I had trouble flying today, so go ahead.
My understanding was, you know, this long picture we've heard about a long time for China is the difference between the very well developed coastal region and sort of pushing the boundary west of development with these mega construction projects. And that includes, in some places, you have a factory with a bigger workforce than the population of San Francisco, and they're building those all the time. But they're starting to build some that are empty and awaiting occupation, and that they're still fighting against the rural underdevelopment further west in China, and that it's sort of the same way that the American South was underdeveloped for a long time, or say southern Italy was underdeveloped relative to northern Italy. Like part of the
Tennessee
reason
Valley Authority.
Italy had the great B-movie industry through the 80s was in part because, like Bollywood movies, a lot of people didn't have television. So where do you get your music videos? In your Bollywood movie. Where do you get what you might get on television in another Western country, in Italy up through the 80s? At least southern Italy, you know, Sicily, Calabria, Apulia. You get it by going to the movies. Once they had electricity in those small towns, the B-movie industry kind of died. You know, people switching over to cable, it's a new world. Technology changes, the market changes. So is there a degree to which the Chinese development is going to run up against, Eric, do you have any sense of this, up against that underdevelopment in rural China and further west? And the other one, Peter Zeihan talked about. Does anyone read him?
Yeah.
The population.
Isn't he a CIA guy or something?
He had consulted to the Defense Department, but then frankly, who hasn't in this world, Vic?
I have never been so fortunate.
Well,
My
there's still
father,
time for you, Dave.
my father worked for the Department of Defense.
My dad was lucky enough to be sent to Vietnam by them.
There you go.
My dad was in Vietnam as well.
Ouch.
Well, he
Well,
came
the
back.
war, not
He
the
came back.
land.
He
Yes.
came
So Adam asked me a question.
But the
Can I-
population decline is something Zeihan
Oh,
predicts,
yeah.
that because
Oh,
of
two
small
questions,
family
okay.
size, China will, within the next couple of decades, despite maybe being in a great position for rare earths and for the tech sector, for being they're resource poor in other ways, like say fossil fuels, and they're about to have way too few 18-year-olds and a whole lot of senior citizens within the next decade or two. Is that going to, and it's going to be more severe there even than in some of the Western countries. The imbalance between
because the lack
younger
of
working
immigration.
age people and an enormous number of elderly people.
Yeah, low birth rate is pretty comparable to Western countries or U.S., but because they don't have immigration like the U.S. does, that's the end result is the population decline is severe. Well, versus here is not a decline. So
is that an argument for immigration?
Well, it is.
Or just replace them
Well,
all with
if
AI.
I may-
Who needs kids when you got bots?
All things.
Moderator, if I may, he asked me how the China has any measure to solve the difference between backward areas and advanced areas, and it's actually China has been struggling with that issue since day one, since 1949. And you might know during the Cultural Revolution, that's one extreme case. They actually mandate each family in the city to have at least one child. At the time, they have
The teenagers go to the villages.
they have multiple children. At the time, that's before one-child policy. That's a different issue. They mandate one child to go to the countryside. The city families to go to one. You have to have one child go to the countryside, and to get there to develop that area. So that's one very extreme measure, and then of course they move beyond that. And nowadays they have other policies. They just use infrastructure because Chinese, they have a mantra. They have a belief. If you want to develop a place, you want to build a road to it. Number one. So that's their policy now. That means public spending, infrastructure, not just road, road first, or railroad, highway, or power generation. Infrastructure goes, and then population will follow. So people will pursue opportunity there.
Build
Of course.
dams.
It's like the railroads in the United States in the 1800s.
A little bit like that, yeah. So
I can see Hayek being like
so that's their general direction policy. And also, in the meantime, there will be subsidies. They're from rich provinces, subsidize the poor provinces. So there's two prongs. They don't mandate the population movement anymore. They use money. They use development too. Well, that's quite different from going from top, if I may. It's going from top down. So to me, it's kind of socialist, although I try to avoid that kind of level of talking, right? But if you really want to go back to the 19th century, I will point out, right? That is a difference. That's one of the differences. And so the population decrease. I'm exposed to a lot of Chinese media. It's not talked about a lot. It's talked about, but not talked about like you guys. You guys care about China more than the Chinese care about China. They talked about it. There's some cities, some localities, they have policies to encourage birth, like give you some goodies for new couple, newly married couple have child, first child, second child, that sort of thing, on the local basis, not on a national basis. So they notice that, but they don't feel the severity or urgency like some nice American people that I'm sitting around with, right? That's kind of strange, right? But I would say probably the fact on the ground is it's not that serious. It's not a problem, but it's not that serious. Because why? Because China is very big on AI, automation. They have more automated factory and bigger scale, more applications than the U.S. They probably see that. In terms of economic growth, it's not that big of a problem, the population decline. So I would submit that probably, that's why they see that people here don't see. Because they live there, they work there. That's around them, as opposed to we were just looking at them from thousands of miles away.
But the yeah, but you're not that singular, or China is not that singular in population decline. If you had looked at Spain, the United States,
South Korea, Japan.
Japan.
Even
South Korea,
Muslim
Japan,
countries are
even
starting
the
to have
US
minimum
starting to slow
one
down.
too.
yeah, the U.S. without immigration, we actually do have a declining population. And
Birth rate, we're talking about birth
City
rate.
Chicago had a declining population until the Venezuelan migration.
No, Portugal, Spain.
Yeah.
Well, you separate birth rate and population decline, right? Those are two.
True.
Birth rate is one element, one factor of population growth or decline.
I just see that China's population has declined, but so is most of the Western world is having the population decline. Your children are not sources of free labor for your agrarian economy.
There is plenty of wine.
Yet.
Plenty of wine.
I mean,
Plenty
you're
of
not
wine.
working
And
on
even
the
some
farm and
whiskey.
having your
For
kids
sure.
do chores. I mean, just in our age of information, it just makes sense just to not have as many children.
Right,
So-
because children
But
is
this
a
isn't
cost.
just China, it's a whole bunch of all.
Right,
all
it's a
these
cost
Western-
base. The children doesn't produce; they consume.
Tell me about
In
it.
the old days, when population was growing, if not for the poor medicine, the high infant mortality rate, because children were labor source. They're not. They contribute to the family more than they consume. Now it's the other way. They contribute zero.
And this isn't just China, it's just a whole
Right,
bunch
That's
of.
why the birth rate is
Right,
low.
worldwide.
Yes, so that's not.
Well, I was gonna try to
Oh, okay.
poke.
Gabe.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to piggyback off of Eric's point because I think he's made a lot of great ones. I think, like, I have family in China too. My mom's from Hong Kong. I have family in Shanghai, all over China as well. So I try to keep up to date with the news there as well. But I think, like, to David's point, along the economic dimensions that matter to a nation's sovereignty. So I'm thinking energy security. I'm thinking commodities, minerals. I'm thinking industrial capacity and industrial policy at the government level. China's excellent. Second to none, right? Especially in their ability to build infrastructure. I've never seen any country do it better and do it faster. So it's extremely impressive. But alluding to your point about the transition in the economy that's occurring, especially, like, if I may, like, the transition to more of a consumer or consumption-based economy versus a production-based economy, manufacturing, it's a difficult transition to make. And the problem is, it's exacerbated by the fact that China's technology is evolving quite quickly, especially in AI, robotics, and all those things. But technology is inherently deflationary as an economic effect. The problem is that with China's subsidies and the issues with the property sector and the effect that's had on the broader economic mood or vibe, especially with the domestic consumer, I think it's almost 2 years now of consecutive months of consumer deflation in the prices. And so you can argue about whether or not, like, from my perspective as a libertarian, like, deflation is fine because that
Your money's worth
I
more.
don't think, like, people are going to suddenly stop purchasing
My savings
things.
is cooler.
Yeah, but, like,
But you're getting paid
in
less.
this like reality that we live in, the Chinese consumer is pulling back to a certain degree, and it does have an effect, and we have to acknowledge that. So I think, like, a question that I would have, Eric, then is, like, I'm curious, the government's continuing to push subsidies to the manufacturing sector especially, and they're kind of exporting the deflation to the rest of the world through, the electric vehicles and all this other technology that's
Trade
extremely
agreements
cheap,
with the United States.
but extremely high quality goods. And, like, what
Yes.
country wouldn't want them, right?
Yes.
I think, like, I'm curious how that will play out as they continue pushing the technology that's inherently deflationary while there's already deflation present in their economy.
Okay, so China's economic transition is two-pronged. One is, like you said, like they call dual cycle. One cycle is external, world trade. The other cycle is internal, domestic consumption, domestic demand. So they want to boost in order to calm the international protest or hostility, if you will. So they promise, they commit to boost domestic demand. So they will rely less on international trade, exporting, right? So that will reduce their other governments. They care about their own unemployment. They will get some promise, right? Get some promise. Okay, hey, China is promising, they're trying, right? And I believe they're trying because it's in their benefit too. If they don't have to rely on foreign markets, they're more sovereign, they're more independent. They don't have to negotiate, fight. It's not a physical fight, but negotiate and joust with other countries all the time. They can just go back to rely on their domestic consumption. Also, people's living standard will rise because they get to consume. The other prong is they upgrading their upgrade. I mean upgrading. It's not just expand to the new territory like more AI or biotech, those strategic industries. They also upgrade their traditional manufacturing value chain, logistic value chain. So all the way, because they've been enjoying their advantage in production, so that they're the biggest producer or production country in the world, because they have the advantage, but the advantage is vanishing because the labor cost is high, is getting higher. Also, the other third world countries, if you will, they're catching up. They're developing
Vietnam
too.
is a good example.
Yeah, they're eroding, if I can say, into China's territory. So they want to upgrade. Upgrade is to upgrade to the high tech, those advancing high tech technology, AI, biotech, all that stuff, telecommunication. They also upgrading their traditional production process. Just upgrade, just make it better, just make it more efficient, like a leapfrog, like a leap, not just incrementally. That's what transition means. So there's a two prong. So what's the best way to boost domestic consumption? Right, that's a big challenge, and they don't have a silver bullet. They just try everything. Just number one, give people more sense of security, because Chinese tradition is they save for themselves. They don't rely on credit card, or social benefit or safety net. So you based on that tradition, that historical mindset, it's hard. But higher saving rate is not a bad thing. But as you said, the mood is low. The consumer mood is low. That's why that's one more reason for them not to consume. I was on the ground. I know. I talked to people. They are concerned. They still have maintained the same level of living standard, but they worry about tomorrow. What if tomorrow? Because the consensus, I don't know, their perception, the people's perception is, since COVID, they have a lot of lockdown, local lockdown here and there, to all create all the lockdowns and uncertainties. That's since COVID, that's where the recession goes. Well, Chinese definition of recession. Here you don't define recession with 5% GDP growth as recession, but I'm talking about Chinese perspective. They feel the recession, they feel the decline, they fear they're not comfortable with spending. I have a taxi driver or Uber driver, I can't remember which one. He had a family restaurant. Used to be like with lines, they had busy all the time.
In the United States?
No, in China, probably in Shanghai or Nanjing.
Okay.
And now they don't have much business. That makes them worried. We still have money, we're not starving, but it gets us worried.
So like a boom and busts.
Yeah, that sort of thing. But it's not necessarily cycle. It's not cyclical. It's just a phase. You hit that phase, it was precipitated by the COVID disaster. And also your development path hits that phase. It's impetus for you to go to the next phase. Might as well. It's probably a good thing to have that little bit crisis or decline. That pushes you to go to the next phase. Sooner, earlier, harder. So it's trying many things. It's a really hard thing to increase the consumer consumption. I know there's a lot of propaganda I watched. I barely watch TV. I don't know, maybe I didn't tune to the good channels, but the channels that I had in the hotel, it was really boring. It's all central government. not local government, central Beijing propaganda. Oh, economy is doing so good here and there. Also, local, province, provincial. They also, we're doing
the
so
Hong
good.
Local Hong Kong TV is the same way.
Yeah, we're doing so good here.
Free Jimmy Live.
Just. Oh, that's a donation.
Yeah.
He said Hong Kong, I had to say it. For posterity on this recording.
Right. So that's to boost. Part of the economy or consumer confidence is a self-fulfilled prophecy. So if you give people this optimism, maybe they will take it 20%. If you're the government, media, if you don't say anything, people will assume the worst. If you say 100, maybe people will say, hey, maybe I'll believe like 25%. It's better than nothing. So I'm just saying they do many ways, many things. There's no silver bullet. They just try a lot of things. See, as much as can work, the more it works, the better. That's the thing. It's hard.
I think you think the long view. I think that the way they handled the rare earth minerals was projecting out not in a 4-year presidential term, as in the United States, but a much longer. We're going to be needing rare earths. We're going to need to have a way to refine rare earths. Or the whole thing with the EVs and looking at basic battery technology. Yeah, and
renewable energy generation.
And so I think that they have a much longer term planning, whereas the United States, I think we just, well, who's the president? I'm going to be president for 4 years, and it's just a much, how soon am I going to get a ROI, a return on my investment?
So we need one party rule to plan. No, I'm just joking.
No, but I think that China.
You're not joking. I mean, maybe it works for China. I mean, that works for the U.S.
Well, because it's a cultural thing too.
It's interesting that we've been talking about China now for, I don't know, half an hour.
Because I skewed the conversation.
And nobody has mentioned what's happened in the last few days. A total political coup in which Xi Jinping has got rid of all these generals. Now, I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't know enough about it, but I'm interested to find out. But China is going through a political crisis. It's not going through an economic crisis. It's going through an economic slowdown.
He got rid of Nancy Pelosi.
It's going through an economic slowdown, which I think will be permanent. You'll never again see
you can't have explosive
growth rates over 10%. So 5% is great by Western standards, and there's no reason they shouldn't have 5% for some time to come. However, politically, they're in very severe crisis. Now, this may be temporary, and it may, but the whole political system has changed because all these people at the top are being investigated, which means they're going to be tried and sentenced. Are they going to be replaced by a lot of other people, or is Xi going to become like Stalin? I mean, this is a very crude approach to it because I don't know much about the inner workings of the Chinese political system, but it's certainly very serious.
Moderator, can I confuse the audience a little bit more?
Yes, and then after that, I actually had some more some questions back to the original.
Okay, it's the same.
He had his own questions.
It's the same as population decline. The nice American friends here think it's a bigger problem than the Chinese people down there on the ground thing. It's the same. The same. The government, as you can see, although you keep saying, well, I don't know much, but you said it pretty definitively, right? I guess a lot of people here probably share that sentiment, like, oh, China's in a political crisis. I got the most pessimistic view from the Falun Gong guy. Even he doesn't think that.
Falun Gong, yeah.
Yeah, even he doesn't think that.
the Epic Times and
Right.
they're the cult though, right? They're
Right. They were banned from China. So they have every reason to badmouth China, to be pessimistic, to influence other people as such. Even they don't say that. Even they don't see that the way David portrays it.
Well, it seems to
So,
me it's an
so
unusual.
it's safe to say it's not that bad.
Well, it's an unusual event,
excuse
though,
me, the
right?
population of China is
Let me give
kept
you a little
totally
detail.
ignorant of Chinese politics.
No, not Falun Gong. They
Totally
that's
ignorant.
a
No, no.
Langley,
Oh,
Virginia
oh.
lie.
You know,
Their opinion is worth nothing. It's worth
no, Falun
it's
Gong.
worth
No,
less than
they're
yours.
overseas. They're in
Because
U.S.
you live in
And
China.
Chinese people. Okay, you think Chinese people are ignorant? I mean, you should
No,
go to
but
China.
I mean,
Ignorant
willing
of
to
their
say
own
what they
government.
really
Yeah.
think.
Like a
Ignorant of their own
multi-pronged
government.
Oh,
approach.
no.
Oh.
I learned
They have
from them.
they have a news
Maybe I'm even more
organization,
ignorant.
they-
But that's not how I think of them. You're entitled to your view, but I'm due to share my view. See who's more credible. See what I look like. See what David looks like, right? See what language do I speak.
is
See
racist.
what he speaks. See where I came
never
from.
thought I'd
See
say
where he came from, right?
You
See
look
who's
more Chinese than he does.
Yeah, a little bit.
know,
Just
I
a
was
little
the
bit.
second most
Just a little
Chinese.
bit.
I've heard similar to you, Eric. It's not as big of a deal.
It is, you know, there are three, we can divide into three sections where Xi Jinping can stay in power, okay? We'll make it simple. Just talk about Xi Jinping. If he can stay in power, he has to please, or three sections will have to agree he stays in power. Number one is a central, I don't know how to translate the central police unit. It's about 10,000 people. It's a police unit to control and protect the high level. I don't know how to translate that. High level officials or ex officials, retired officials.
Sort of like a Praetorian Guard.
I was going to say the Praetorian
Or like,
Guard
yeah,
that we were all
Yeah.
I think you pronounce, well, maybe not. I don't know.
Uh,
Seems like you got the idea across to me.
Yeah. So, so Xi Jinping has to please them because they're his guards. Xi Jinping may be able to control, maybe to command $2 million people strong PLA, but those 10,000 people can arrest him. If the head of the 10,000 people, that unit, to arrest Xi Jinping, they can go in and do that. But the problem is, what after that? What comes after that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so number one, Xi Jinping needs to have that, right? Number two, it's the military, PLA. That's what the lot of dismissals going on. That's only PLA. Number
I don't know
three,
what you just said, PLA?
People's
that's the
Liberation
military.
Okay, PLA.
That's the military of China?
Yeah,
People's Liberation Army.
Okay. All right.
Military.
That's good to know.
Number three is the political / party. That section, Xi Jinping is undisputed. Central police or protection, whatever, the head of that guy is Xi Jinping's guy, so he has no problem with that part. Actually, that's the part that arrested the last two, the number one military guy. So Xi Jinping is cleaning up the military. So he's only cleaning up the military, and the reason he's able to clean up the military because he's in control. He just wants to prevent that in the future that he will be out of control. And the cleanup is not just one shot. It's been going on for probably 2 years, or a little less than 2 years. They clean up the 50 officers and some officers throughout a year and a half, 2 years. They had a heated argument with the guy he just arrested, the number 2 guy, or number 1 guy in the military. So a lot of people say, well, maybe that's a sign it's gonna get him. And lo and behold, he did. So there's a very credible reporting, is like a viewpoint that Chinese military has been corrupt. A lot of corruption. So corruption is really bad in the military, well, everywhere. But I can tell you, in the military, it's really corrupt because military life is hard. But when your officers are corrupt, it affects the morale of the enlisted people, of the basic soldiers. So it's really hard. It's really bad, really pernicious problem. So those corrupt officers, including as reportedly the top guys he recently got rid of, they're entrenched with corruption. So they're the guys that don't want to take risk. Military is about taking risk, military career, including risking your own life. But if you're comfortable if you have the network of profiteering or grift,
You don't want to risk it.
you want to risk it. So when it's necessary to take some action for national security, they will voice the opposite, the down that thing. They will exaggerate the risk and minimize the benefit, importance. So Xi Jinping, there's a view that Xi Jinping is cleaning up that element to replace them with his own people.
Okay, hold on one second. Do you have like a question?
I wanted, as the speaker's prerogative, to kind of. Sorry, you've spoken a lot tonight, Eric.
Yeah,
I
I'm
wanted
aware
to
of that.
throw
I'm
it back at you because I know
aware of
you've
that.
been
I'm
itching to
aware of
talk, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah, we can get back to the China stuff because I am curious
That's
about
okay.
the
We don't have to.
coup stuff because Vox Day did mention it a couple days ago. As far as to bring it all the way back to the presented topic for the evening, so
Welfare.
welfare and libertarianism. Like David, you said that Hayek is not a libertarian. I think the word you used, like a Whig or something.
An old Whig.
An old Whig. What would the
That's what he said.
what
Yeah.
would the what would
We don't know
the
what a Whig
equivalent
I
contemporary
know.
term
It's
be? What would
from
be
the
the
early-
best contemporary
US party.
description that we would apply using
Before
today's
Republicans.
political?
The Whigs were like the party in Parliament that opposed the king.
Right.
But if
But that is true. But
Old Whig is like
the
a-
Whigs were people who adopted an outlook which eventually became what we now call classical liberalism. Although there was a period when it wasn't so clear that was what it was. So classical liberalism, which you get in classic texts like Locke's second essay on government, right? That's a very what I was calling
old Whig.
from the ground up kind of approach. What are the basic elements of government? What should government do? That kind of thing. And Locke argued that the basic function of government was to protect property rights, including, of course, one's property in one's own body, so that one is not arbitrarily killed, right? But there was a period before that when there was a Whig attitude. Later on, also, the term Whig became associated with a belief in progress, especially looking back.
The Whig
right?
theory
The
of
things had
history.
got better and better, and so people talk about the Whig view of history, right? But there was a period where there were Whigs and they thought in a certain way, and in a way David Hume and Adam Smith belong in this, although they're a fairly late development in it. And it's a kind of skepticism about planning, skepticism about government, high valuation of individual liberty, certainly not in any way socialist or equalitarian, that you find in all these people. If you read David Hume, he's got a very definite outlook on the world. And a lot of people, by the way, the Whigs were opposed to the Tories. The Tories were the people who, in Parliament, always supported the king.
Conservative Party.
What they became later.
So the Whigs are prepared to oppose the king and place limits on the king every chance they got. So that's what, and so Hayek said when he was put in a corner about this, he said, "I'm not a conservative, I'm not a liberal," although of course there's no doubt that in practical terms, in policy terms, Hayek is a classical liberal 90% of the time, right? Or more than 90% of the time. But the difference is the Whig attitude was respect for evolved institutions and great hesitancy to attack evolved institutions, whether they were nominally private or public. That I suppose that's one of the elements of the old Whig view of history, and Hayek harks back to that, and he says, "I'm really an old Whig." So
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
I mean, I think
It's like Burke. It's for the overlap of classical liberalism.
I think
and almost
I think
conservatism.
in English politics you get this very much embodied in Enoch Powell, who was a very important politician in the 60s.
Important in quotes.
Oh, he was important, whether you like it or not.
So Enoch Powell was a free market kind of person, but for certain things, like for instance the National Health Service, he was not in favour of the National Health Service when it came in, and he never really became reconciled to it, but he thought that it was an evolved institution that had to be respected. And also, another example in Britain, this might strike people who were not Brits in England in the 50s and 60s, but if there's anything that you can call an evolved institution in Britain, it's the trade union movement. And all kinds of people who were of conservative minded, let's say, but who were old Whig in their attitude, thought that there was something sacred about the trade union movement, because it had evolved, it was a reality in politics and in English institutions, and so on. So anyway,
So medieval times? Did it have a medieval?
Well, no,
heritage?
there were no trade unions. There were guilds. There were guilds.
Yeah.
But whether the trade unions carry forward anything of the guilds is one of those many vexed historical questions, and I don't have an opinion on it. But certainly they're not the same.
Okay.
So this is what Hayek said about himself. And you do detect in Hayek that if something has been around for a long time and a lot of people are following it and respecting it, that in itself is grounds for respecting that institute. This is Hayek, right? Not me. So that's the Hayekian kind of view on this.
Is there a contemporary term that encapsulates that?
Difficult to. I think a lot of paleoconservatives in the United States think this way. That's one of the reasons I find myself drawn to them.
I disagree.
You don't think?
And the reason why I will disagree is because I mentioned at the beginning of my talk was Steve Miller's wife said, "Oh, classical liberalism. That's commie speak for communist."
That sounds like someone who doesn't know anything about anything.
No.
But I mean, isn't Stephen Miller the?
I mean that this is Stephen Miller's wife, correct?
His wife, yeah.
Gotcha.
And so we're talking about a couple of arch Zionists here, who just want us to follow the doings of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Arch Zionist? You mean was Hayek? I know Mises was Jewish. Is Hayek Jewish?
Hayek is the one Gentile of the Big Five.
Yeah. I have to make a confession. There is
the Big Five. I like how you.
I have to make a confession.
Yeah.
There is one definite mistake in my book, From Marx to Mises.
Yeah.
And that is where I say that Hayek had a Jewish background. And I had all kinds of reasons for thinking this had to be true. For one thing, Hayek wrote a piece called Remembering My Cousin Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Ludwig Wittgenstein, everybody knows, had a partly Jewish background, so that helped. But then also various people whose opinions I thought had carried some weight told me that, and in fact I remember I was told by some of these Austrian economists, like Richard Ebeling, that Mises and Hayek had in common that they had both become elevated to the aristocracy.
Right, the Von.
At a point where it was possible for people of Jewish background to do this, which most of the time was not true. Now it is true that Mises was very much Jewish.
And his family was there. He got the aristocracy.
And an aristocrat. Yeah. And his daughter, who goes by the name of Gita Shereni, is a big Jewish nationalist, Zionist, propagandist for the Holocaust, and all the rest of it. But
For the Holocaust, like Steven Spielberg.
for the importance of the Holocaust, you know what I mean.
Order.
But it turns out, there was a later interview with Hayek where he said, because, another thing that made me think it had to be true was that Hayek wrote a piece saying, I was in a partly Jewish, partly Gentile ambiance or
Milieu.
group of people. And I thought, well, you wouldn't say that unless you were Jewish. Why would you bother to mention it?
See,
But of course I was wrong. That was one more
I grew
thing.
up in the North
That was one
Bronx
more
as a
thing.
Gentile.
It turns out that there was an even later interview with Hayek.
Married somebody.
It turns out there was an even later interview with Hayek where he said, lots of my Jewish friends have suggested I must have Jewish ancestry, but I've been unable to find any. So that's the one definite mistake in my book, From Marx to Mises, because I say both Mises and Hayek were elevated to both had Jewish background. I didn't put in that other thing. That
Unless anybody wants to comment on the topic that has not to do with China.
Well,
Mike, we haven't heard from Mike tonight.
Yeah. I'll wait.
All right, just going back to
He's the moderator.
welfare thing, and like NHS. So for the National Health Service, it's been around, I think, almost 80 years.
mhm.
So, I know there are critics of it in the UK, but for the critics of NHS, do they have any influence that could reform it or even?
I mean,
get
it's
rid
one of these things that is successfully confined to, quotes, right-wing, quotes, circles. In other words, yeah, they have influence in right-wing circles, but there's no danger that it's going to affect the actual political policies. No one is going to crusade to disband the NHS. It's like a sacred cow. Last time, I mean, look, I haven't lived in Britain for 45 years, but this is my impression. I know more about Ukraine than I know about Britain, actually. I know almost as much about China as I know about Britain.
Another
Respect
question.
for institutions, though, NHS.
Right. Well, that's Hayek. Hayek. I don't know if Hayek would say that. I mean, it's a curious thing for Hayek to say, by the way, because there are other places in Hayek where he talks about how we should not be afraid to get rid of, things that don't work. He has both.
Pragmatic.
No, there's nothing pragmatic about it.
Yes, you can use whatever word. That's the best word. Karina used it. That's the first word. When you're describing what you would call that, that's the first word. I mean, you might not think that that's the appropriate word, but I mean, and I guess I mean, you can't dictate what people colloquial use words for. So if me and Karina want to call that pragmatic,
Yeah, you could.
I guess it is pragmatic.
I can call this a banana,
You are free
but
to.
that doesn't make it a banana.
You are.
But that okay,
It's a
but
different thing. It's a pragmatic. It's the adjective.
More
Banana
people
is
would
the real
probably
thing.
agree that is not a banana
It's not
than
comparable.
people would agree that we're talking pragmatism.
You are entirely within your rights to espouse a fallacious opinion.
Practicalness.
A question I was going to ask. So, this libertarianism and welfare, you quoted Hayek. Like, if you had to summarize, what is the main takeaway we should all walk away with? What is the main takeaway of your presentation, or Hayek's views on welfare, and what's the big upshot?
As I mentioned during my talk, I haven't read the entirety of the Constitutional Liberty, but based on what I've read, I think that the takeaway from it is Hayek is a statist, even though Hayek might use the word statist in a negative connotation. You cannot deny that things I quoted were not statist. And I would also have the more hard-edged libertarians in the room or anybody else who might be listening, have a little more nuance, right? I mean, a lot of like libertarian like bullshit, like trolling online is that status, bro. But like, okay, well, you remember the Libertarian Party, so you at least believe in elections. Elections are status. So can we not be so incendiary in our rhetoric? Can we fine tune our language to be more pragmatic and realistic? And that is my giveaway. That is
and not completely purist to the end.
Right. Yeah.
Paralyzing, ultimately.
Because anarchism, in my opinion, Hayek will agree. Hayek is not, or Mises and Hayek are not anarchists. They're statist, but they are not anarchists. They and the Mises caucus might hate the fact that Mises calls himself a statist, or not calls himself a statist. He's an anti-anarchist. So I basically from this, I want there to be more nuance when libertarians talk about these type of topics. Is really the gist of my conversation.
It kind of, I can't remember who I was talking to. Might have been Adam, might have been Gabe. When I was talking about, like, can a group of people, like a country or an ethnicity or a religion, can they act, advocate, pursue policy as a group, pursue group interests? And I made the distinction between acting collectively and being collectivist. And it seems like, the libertarian trolls who might say, that's statist, bro, like those same ones, if you try to act collectively, will say, that's collectivist, bro. And it's like, no, not necessarily. I think you can, on a voluntary basis, gather into groups. You can include and exclude on a free association basis, and then collectively decide to do certain things, and maybe even advocate for things as a collective without falling into collectivism.
What kind of crowd are you mixing up with, man?
I mean, I can't say this in polite company. Eric, come on, don't put me on the spot like that. I'm just saying.
Even if you were to say all, even realistically, let's take Dave Smith's argument that a significant amount of people do not want mass immigration. Well, I mean, even that premise is wrong, because you can only deduce that from polling, I suppose, or for the amount of people who voted for Donald Trump, which I think is more what his baseline was.
It's like a 2% majority.
X amount of people voted for Donald Trump, therefore enough people don't want it, therefore it's involuntary. Well, first off, most people didn't even, people who vote in elections is less than the majority. And then the less than the majority of that is people even voted for Donald Trump.
Good night.
Now, okay, you can't really take it's really hard to implement the
by the way, that
non-voters into consent, but
that applies to every election, though.
Yes, and then that's almost. I've had conversations with Eric about this. I do think democracy can, not ultimately, but can reflect preference and consent to a degree. And that is why I sort of agree with Dave Smith's premise, and why I asked everybody to give their most libertarian argument so I can throw in there, just to prove that, yes, democracy can be an expression of consent.
Yeah, as a side point to steelman Dave Smith's argument, or maybe not even steelman it, maybe just a different argument that's probably stronger that I've heard about specifically, I don't want to just open up the immigration topic, but like the idea that if you were going to try to approximate what movement of people looks like in a totally free system, the way David was describing that we don't have, because we don't have private ownership of the roads and the public infrastructure and, you know, these various institutions and things like that. What would the movement of people look like in that scenario? It almost certainly would not look anything like the waves of mass migration that we've seen in recent years, you know, where you get caravans and you get, you know, subsidized, get put up in hotels, and we plunk hundreds of thousands of, or at least tens of thousands of Somalians in Minnesota, because that makes sense, right? You know, all these things, the various, you know, manifestations of the effects of mass migration, like, this is not what would occur at all in, like, the hyper-libertarian system, you know. So what would be the next best thing? The next best thing would be to approximate what would that look like. Could that be perfect? Probably not. But you can approximate some of that. Like, you might have like a gated community that might have certain policies of, you know, whatever. And
Absolutely.
like, that would be a way to do it. And so
Like,
maybe there's
Perhaps the
like,
second best conflicts with what libertarian principles are.
I mean, see, I think this is where we're starting to get towards more the, you know, Hans Hermann Hoppe covenant community stuff, where, you know, you could argue that like a gated community is like the smallest baby step toward that, right? But if you allowed more robust freedom of association, you know, by jurisdiction or by collective, where you can enforce who can stay and who can come and who can go and that kind of thing. Like, no random X, Y, or Z person can't just come into this community. Like, that is still libertarian in the broader sense, even though it's not like I can do whatever I want.
It would only be libertarian if you're talking about, and even how Hans Hoppe calls it, or frames it, is in an anarchist framework. You cannot have Hoppian covenant communities in a statist framework, because government should not discriminate.
It has to be the shareholders or stakeholders in the property.
Now you could probably
exchange it.
Yeah. But you can maybe even like grant like more. In the United States now, we have a large degree of anti-discrimination law,
which all needs to go.
Well,
actually, hold on. Let me pull up my quote again here from Dave Smith again.
We know what it is. You've already done it. Like,
I want to do it again. I want to do it again just for this.
I'm going to jump
Speak
in
in your own words.
after
Don't
Comrade
quote.
Tucker.
Dave Smith
Go ahead,
doesn't
Adam.
do it for
Go
me.
ahead.
Well, you know, despite all of this, I remember speaking to a number of people in the residential rental market in the Chicago area that, well, they're not supposed to talk about the ethnic composition of a building when they're showing it,
No,
for example,
by law.
on the market.
By law.
Do you think it happens in practice, Vic, even though it's against the law? Like when
Yes.
a realtor points to the names on the buzzers and says, "This is a good neighborhood." Or when they say, "I know that according to the 1968 Civil Rights Act, as they said to me and my now wife, we're not supposed to tell you who lives in this building, but I'm just gonna say."
Well,
Did
good.
we call the cops on them? Is it
No,
so
it's things like
commonplace that
this
it's
that enable
unenforceable?
society to continue.
It's a
to
high degree of trying to prove it.
It's the MacGyver workarounds. You know,
I'll give you another. A friend of mine who's Polish American, both parents born in Poland, said, "Oh, this building's great. It's so cheap, but they only rent to Polish people." Sorry, I'm like, I know that that's not legal,
It
and
isn't.
yet somehow
It's
they
not.
got away with it in Uptown. You know, in the year 2007 or 8.
And
you
he
know.
doesn't want to
In
stay
the
in a
age of
building.
Obama, they were getting away with this. In the summer capital of the American Obama empire, Chicago, Illinois. Something tells me that
Because-
these crippling civil rights protections are rather toothless.
I'm dismayed to hear this.
I'm
You're
gonna
saying
go with
Polish
a hell no on that, because okay, in Obama's, you know, whatever, you know, post-racial utopia, you know, paraphrasing in the spirit of what you were saying, in the
Standing on the wings of a new tomorrow.
whatever, hope and change and all that.
Did you just make that up?
Okay, fine. One dude showing one possible rental to a couple or one person, like, is the eye of the panopticon, eye of Sauron of the anti-discriminatory state gonna find that out?
Call me Palantir.
Probably not. They probably have bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
But
Right.
also, there is the stark fact that a lot of this talk about discrimination applies to only one kind of discrimination,
Right.
which is anti-black discrimination. All other kinds of discrimination, especially anti-white discrimination, is encouraged and flourishes everywhere, and nobody ever thinks of taking
Dave,
it
do I have to
forward.
pull up the quote here?
Oh,
No, you
If
don't.
people do not wish to have anti-white,
Well, and this is what the declining population of Chicago, what was the bulk of that? Some of it is birth control and lower birth rates, and a lot of it is white flight after the Great Migration from the South to the South Side and the West Side of African Americans. Suburban Cook County was rural Cook County, until the automobile and the large development to the point where now there's almost as many people in suburban Cook County as there is in the city. Just under 2.5 million and a little over 2.5 million for the city. The city was over 4 million way back, and those were country towns. Old Man Daley barely understood this, because in his final years as mayor, he was still referring to them as those country towns. There are now there's more people in suburbanites in Illinois than there are Chicago residents, that's for darn sure. People have moved voluntarily out to those places, and a great deal of that was, it is argued, motivated by racial antipathy, and also the things like, well, you could move out in an apartment and have your own yard and a small house.
The school system,
The school system.
You want your kid to go to a good school.
Well, and now with the yuppification of the North
Honestly.
Side, I can see this. People who used to flee the public school system on the North Side, if they've regentrified the North Side, are now like, perhaps since the last Great Recession or the 2008-9. One of the parents who's got kids slightly older than mine said, I noticed that a lot of people were like settling for the local public school and gentrifying the local public school because, well, shit, if we just took a big financial hit, we're not going to pay private school tuition on top of that. So you get a two-tier school system with magnet schools and kind of the experience that public school students have in the North Shore, compared to what they have on the West Side or the South Side, is dripping in more and more to communities where that's the sort of socioeconomic composition of the community. It's sort of dominating the Waters Elementary.
New Trier.
Yeah, Waters
Waters
Elementary
Elementary
is
is
like a
great
miniature Winnetka or Kenilworth, in Lincoln Square.
is it Trovian or Truvian or what is it?
Trevian.
Trevian.
But,
So you feel your daughter's getting an education?
she's got one in 2 languages, let me
Yeah, she's got the immersive Spanish language.
Yeah, she's not at Waters, she's at Inter-American, but yeah, she's learning.
what grade? 7th grade, you said?
No, she's 7 years old. She's
7 years
7
old.
years old.
she's
First or
young,
second
grade,
grade.
that's
young
second
sprout. She's but a young sprout.
She's in first grade already, dude.
She is in 1st grade already. I picked her up from
Oh,
school
first
today.
grade.
Time flies, man.
Yeah, tell me about it. She's got attitude too.
Oh,
But,
already? Oh, nice.
Like her father.
She's had attitude. She was like her
Yeah,
father,
where she came from.
like
Yeah,
both of her parents.
These things are genetic.
right.
And some are environmental. But, and like I said, with my folks retiring though, that wasn't just me being cheeky. That area where they're living, these aren't, some of them are people on dairy farms, but really a lot of them are just white people who moved to the boonies because they didn't want to live in the suburb, And I don't know how much of that is racial hostility, but there's a sort of retiree pattern there. It's a shitty place to have a job, to get a job if you just graduated high school in like this rural stretch between Milwaukee and Sheboygan. But if you want to quietly get away from the metropolitan area, back to the real America, capital R, capital A, trust me, they found the place. And there's when they fill up the election map, look at the map, it's only these little dots, the major cities, the major metropolitan areas that are voting Democratic. Yeah, well, what do you think the rest of the map is? It's not just towns that are full of Hispanic farm workers. You have some of those too, but that's because the local people aren't having enough kids and making them do farm work. You know?
Overall in America, you have a rural versus urban. So
Very much. With the suburbs, it's kind
James
of the swing
Cargill
vote.
said that Pennsylvania is
Right.
Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama wedged in between. So yeah.
My dad came from that part of
We have the
Pennsylvania.
Cook County, and the rest of the state is really red. We're actually no different than Indiana.
Really
outside
redneck.
of
Yeah.
Cook County. I mean, we're very rural Midwest.
In the absence of a fully privatized education system, I think there probably should be a multi-tier education system, because not all children are intellectually gifted to the same degree.
Hey David, can you talk about the baccalaureate system that in England?
It's not the baccalaureate in England. I mean,
Okay.
my boss, the owner of Carus Books, is a big proponent of the International Baccalaureate. But
What is
never
that?
heard the
I'm
term
not- IB
baccalaureate
is like
used in reference
BP.
to the English system. Unless it's something that's coming. I don't know anything about England in the last 40 years.
Okay, you said that before, yeah. Well,
But there was no baccalaureate back
you
then.
have to test in, and I think you'd be better off in a vocational school, and you're not going, like the baccalaureate. I think in America, it's like anyone could potentially become a neurosurgeon if you put your mind to it and you put your.
Yeah, but that's
You-
not really true.
And I think the baccalaureate is more.
I don't think
I've
I can.
tested you.
No, I
and-
don't think that's true.
No, but
Or you wouldn't be a very good one.
But if there's
The baccalaureate-
Hayek or
I gave you a
Friedman with
test
his
and-
no credentials.
Sorry, go ahead, Karina.
Well, I tested you, and I measured your abilities, and sorry, hon, you're not going to be the neurosurgeon, but I have a great apprenticeship program for you. Am I right?
What you say doesn't ring a bell with me.
Well, that there is a baccalaureate test,
I don't.
right?
I've never heard the term baccalaureate used in connection
International?
with the British.
Okay, I
education
shouldn't
system.
forget
Maybe
the British.
It has
Well, like
been
the French.
recently.
The
I'm sure
French
bachelor and
language.
baccalaureate
What they
have
use.
some
Going to
etymological
college.
Yeah,
relation.
American
children-
order.
What they used to
Tracking
be.
them off, yeah.
What they used to be,
Like
but
very
this is
early.
long gone. But it was very decisive in my life. There used to be something called the 11 plus, and that was approximately the age of 11. Everybody, all school children in the state system, took an examination, and if they passed that examination, they went to a grammar school, and if they failed that examination, they went to what was called a secondary modern school, which was basically an inferior set of shacks with out-of-date textbooks and so on. And then there was also a technical school sort of stream, but I'm not sure how they sorted them out. What happened was then they introduced the comprehensive system as it was called. I don't know whether this still exists.
Are those A levels?
And the comprehensive system is essentially the American system,
That they got rid of the selective
where everybody
grammar
goes to the
schools.
same secondary school. Everybody in the state system goes to. So what happened to me was very odd. Like lots of things that have happened at decisive moments in my life that have been disconcerting. I took the 11 plus examination. I was told that I had failed the 11 plus examination. And then in a particular part of Birmingham, they said, you don't have to go to a secondary modern, which is like, going to a tropical plantation in Borneo or something. You can go to this new thing called the comprehensive school. So I actually went and sort of looked at this comprehensive school, which was one of the first in the country, right? And that was the American system coming in. And then it was set that I was to go to this comprehensive school. And then a few weeks later, there was a thing that said, a communication that said, oh, there was a mistake.
Oh.
And you did, in fact, pass the 11 plus. And so you can go to a grammar school. So I went to a grammar school, and in Britain at that time, the classes were streamed, and I can tell you that the name of the class, there were 4 streams, and the name of the class that I went to, the form as we called it, was 1D. 1D, right? In other words, it was the lowest of the first year at this grammar. So I was at this grammar school, and then I was promoted to a higher thing. So, but anyway, later on I learned that this comprehensive school that I had narrowly missed was the coming thing, and as far as I know, that replaced this whole 11 plus division by examination. Now it's interesting that when the 11 plus was being promoted, which is essentially immediately after the Second World War, all the progressive-minded people were very strongly in favour of it, because their argument was, we know that there are talented people in the working class, and we know that IQ, see, the 11 plus exam was a thinly disguised IQ test, and we know that IQ is mainly determined by heredity, and therefore, in order to give the working class a fair shake, we should examine them, and if they have a high IQ, we should put them on a higher track. So that was the theory back in 1945, which was a year after I was born, in case you're curious. So that was the background to it. So there was a period where it was extremely fashionable among progressive intellectuals to support this idea of an IQ test, essentially, at age 11, to decide whether you were to be moved up or allowed to stay with the vast proletarian underbelly, right? So there's all kinds of things I could go into about this, I mean, that are quite ironic. I mean, one thing was that Handsworth Grammar School, which was the grammar school I went to, it was typically these grammar schools, by the way, that they aped the public schools. Now in Britain, public school means an elite private school. That's what it means. Did then, it still does, as far as I know, right? But actually, Handsworth Grammar School was right next to a secondary modern school, and it was just across the street, and there was no connection between, no intercourse, so to speak. I mean, I have to say that, so to speak. Today it would be literal, so I would say no intercourse of any kind between the two, right? And anyway, the grammar schools were generally single sex, and the idea of mixing sexes in a secondary school was very, very advanced, and nobody really thought it would work out, and of course it never did. But anyway, it did come in though.
I'm thinking of Pink Floyd now.
This secondary modern school that was just across the street might have been on the dark side of the moon, right? I mean, I never met anybody from there, never had a conversation with, right just across the street. I could have walked across and said, hey, but I never did. I was a very conformist kind of person, just out of fear, of course. But anyway, so that's what I can tell you about that kind of system. So eventually what happened was, after you'd been 5 years in the grammar school, but not the secondary modern school where you just went to work carrying a plank or whatever you could do, right? But in the grammar school, you took your O-levels, and if you did well in your O-levels, you would stay on until the sixth form, which had 3 years, something 18, 19, 20. Whereas now, what happened to me was I passed a lot of O-levels, but my parents weren't prepared to support me.
Your dear parents who you love so much.
I actually hated both of them.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before, yes.
As a result.
Both my real father and my wicked stepmother. I really detested them, especially my wicked stepmother. But anyway,
Mentioned multiple times, yes.
I don't want to.
Some of us could
I
use
don't
a
want to
recap.
sort of bang away on the same theme. But anyway, I just
So
mentioned
your dear
that.
parents were, you passed your O-levels, but your parents were turds.
They said you've got to get a job. So I did. I got a job as a apprentice journalist in a local newspaper. at the age of 17.
You didn't become a cobbler or
I didn't become a cobbler, I didn't become a welder, I didn't become a plank carrier, I didn't become a ditch digger. I escaped all that.
Did that arrangement that you had as a teenager, was that sort of maybe finessed or a result of the labor movement in Britain?
What part of the experience?
You becoming a journalist, a junior journalist as a teenager.
This is like a forgotten age. In those days, if you became a reporter at a very young age, when I was 17, when I became a newspaper reporter essentially, you were part of this very involved, very complicated apprenticeship scheme. And there were all kinds of rules governing this, which I broke after a couple of years because I went and got a job on another newspaper in breach of my apprenticeship.
Whoa.
Knowing that the
oh man, this is recorded, man. You better.
But also, journalists, you didn't go to college to get a degree in journalism.
Absolutely not. And what could they have taught me anyway?
And even in smaller papers.
I could have taught about writing English prose. I knew more than anybody there would have told me. So
I wish I could have started writing film reviews before I even went to college, because I know
that was
how
one of the
easy
first,
of a
well, actually,
gig that is to do.
The very first thing I had was weddings, because it was a local newspaper and announced all, and basically everybody who was getting married filled out a form, and I had to convert these forms into prose, and they were actually amazed that I could do it so well.
Well, that was for weddings, not obituaries.
Right,
but
then there were also
obituaries.
but then of course, I was sent to the magistrate's court, and I knew what to do. The police gave out what they called a charge sheet. I just copied out the information there. I listened to the evidence. If there was anything really bizarre, I would write a couple of paragraphs about this really bizarre remark that a cop had made or something like that. But basically that's how I started. And then years later, I decided to go to university. And then a whole new universe of idleness and pointlessness opened up. But anyway, my mind wasn't on any of this. I was thinking about socialism, Marxism, and then I was thinking about libertarianism, Murray Rothbard, Ayn Rand, Robert Nozick. I was thinking about all those people, and not thinking at all about what I was supposed to be thinking about. But anyway, that's my life.
Nozick. I mentioned Nozick. You mentioned Nozick. I certainly think he's more libertarians need to read Nozick. I think he's underappreciated.
Well, there was
maybe amongst your peers it was more a thing, but I feel among my peers.
I have not read any.
Well, there was a period.
There was a time.
There was a period of a few years where libertarians, and I was in England, but I was in touch with American libertarians. I mean, you have to understand, libertarianism was essentially an American movement, and it was a movement, 90%, maybe at least 80%, of people who had been Randists. And got pissed off with Randists.
Well, you mentioned earlier. Sorry, I'm going to just quickly before I'll let you. But you mentioned a minute ago or a while ago. Hayek is not a liberal, even though libertarian. He's not a libertarian because he never called himself one. But I countered he will. You say a lot of the modern libertarian movement was Randians. Rand certainly was not a libertarian, at least in her words. But enough people call her a libertarian that, like, I think if enough people call you one, does that make you one?
I think Rand was, in all essentials, a libertarian, although she hated the word and denounced everybody who called themselves libertarians. I think she was basically a libertarian. I mean, I can't think of any. I mean, she had views that were very uncharacteristic of libertarians.
Her collective view that you could be an outlaw nation.
Like she thought she supported Zionism, of course, but also she had this idea that you should not criticize the government when there was a war on. So she was against Vietnam critics. But I mean, I think she was basically, in her outlook, a libertarian. She was I don't think it's much credit to her because these ideas already existed and she just took them over. Mm-hmm. But she believed in the free market in areas where the vast majority of free market people wouldn't go.
Yeah, right? She's got a great moral defense of capitalism, and there's the book is what, It usually starts with Ayn Rand, so there's a cliche that
Usually
this is
begins
like
with. Actually, I haven't seen that book for many years now. I would, if I got a copy now, I would look at it.
Jerome
It usually
Tuchil's
begins
novel.
with Ayn Rand by Jerome Tuchilli.
I'll read it and come back in a couple
It's
months.
very amusing, but it's only amusing if you've been a libertarian. I mean, most people wouldn't find it particularly amusing, but if you've been a libertarian for a while, you find it extremely, amusing. So you're getting even part 2 of the story of my life. There isn't much to it. It's a very
Well, okay, but
brief life.
we have 2 educational systems, one of which is we all go to school together. The other is you're gonna go to advanced school, you're gonna go to
according
the
to a test you've taken. Yeah.
yeah, according to a test, okay, you're gonna be more the yeah.
That's what my education was like. I took a test and I tested into a separate track.
Oh, really?
Suburbs. Yeah.
I mean,
So-
then you,
Wait,
for
in the
5
suburbs of
years.
Chicago?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were out west.
When did you move to the United States? Sorry.
I was a little kid. Like really
Okay,
little.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Alright.
Yeah, you struck me.
Can I ask what
As soon
school
as I saw you, I thought he's a real American.
203 Naperville.
Yeah, he looks real
I
American.
didn't think he was an immigrant.
Right, exactly.
Not like me.
Third grade,
So
okay.
10.
He doesn't look
11.
Chinese
Yeah,
at
10,
all.
11.
And then you're
No, not at all, but that's not
Were
first,
you
my
put
first
in-
reaction.
When he told me he was Asian, like
Yeah, they call
I
it
was
at the time,
surprised. I
I was
thought he
not
was white.
surprised, but like I
PI
didn't
plus,
think of it as
project
that.
study
Yeah, I didn't
plus.
think it, yeah. Yeah, I wasn't
It
surprised,
would just be
but
like
that's
the
not
same
what the first thing I
cohort of
thought.
people for like the next 4 or 5 years.
okay.
And it was like advanced programming, so like we would take classes like years in advance of when you would normally
You were the
take it.
AP people.
Correct.
But the
No,
idea
actually,
is
we took
skim
even
them off
beyond
in grade
AP
school
level
occasionally, yeah.
once we got to high school. Like we would take college, like actual college level classes past a certain point. So,
So how many years did you spend in college? Did you just
I took the full 4 years.
Oh, you did, okay. You
Yeah,
didn't
just
skip.
for internships and networking and all.
But did high school credits count towards college?
My AP credits did, yeah. But I mean, I ended up retaking some of the classes that weren't AP classes, but they were college level, and then I took them again in college.
Oh, okay.
So I took like
You take 2 classes again, basically.
Like I took like calculus 3 like in high school, for example, and I just retook it in college.
Oh.
Freshman.
See, he does have some Asian stuff going on.
What did you study? What did you study in college?
Mathematics.
Mathematics. Did you go to graduate school?
I'm an actuary.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Really?
Actuary.
That's
I have a
awesome.
personal
This is my argument for immigration, by the way.
I thought you were gonna say this is my quant, dude.
personal question.
Sure.
When you were learning to read, did you use phonics or did you use whole
Whole language.
whole language?
What's the difference?
Well,
Alright.
in phonics, they
Cats.
drill you in associating vowels with sounds, and in whole language, they basically skip that.
You just learn the word like
So
what it looks like.
CAT is
I think they do phonics.
I think I did in phonics.
Yeah,
Yeah, my daughter's
because
doing phonics.
that explains why you were able to get a job as an actuary, because you could read.
I mean, hooked on phonics worked for me.
worse than that, he had to take 10 tests. Actuarial.
Only
Yeah,
phonics.
I passed-
The only
I
way to
passed that.
teach reading is through phonics.
And then I heard
It really is.
everything from then
I
on
do
is
remember
just
the cues being confusing
very
when I was a
fat
kid.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
cues,
I was
cues.
confused by the whole thing, but
Insurance.
I still picked up enough to be able to write prose.
For some, yes, but it's actually it's a little more than just the insurance laws for other people to take a look at. We do basically we do the pricing behind the insurance contracts, so it's a lot of like taking historical and current data and projecting it into the future, like trying to understand what the future state looks like.
I was told once that the later exams were less about math, and more about, kind of the intricacies of insurance.
So for me, like for example, not to make it about my career.
No,
No, it's okay. Yeah,
Feel
I'm
free.
studying
all
for
years.
Feel
my
free.
exam
He's
now.
reporting this to the Chinese government.
I was going to ask about newspapers in Midlands.
Well, I mean,
There's a reason
everyone
he's
in
got
China
this
is better
out.
at
You know,
math
he's
than I am, so it's not of use.
See,
to them.
it is a thing. It is a thing.
No, they're exceptionally good at math. Just like talking to my cousins and family friends there, like they're more advanced than like at the same age than America. For
Yeah,
sure.
they have bigger
I don't think that's
brains and
controversial.
more
Saying
brains.
Does it
that
have to do with the
more advanced than America
Cantonese
isn't saying that
language?
much.
On average, that is, yeah.
But like for example, my 8th exam, it's it's called like advanced reserving, and reserving is when you try to calculate how much money an insurance company needs to set aside to have enough to pay out claims over a certain period for your particular book of business. And so it's very math heavy, but it's practical, pragmatic to the actual job versus being like theoretical math, which was like some of the earlier exams, which is just like, you know, like
Number theory.
actuarial, like advanced statistics 1 and 2 were a series of the exams, and they were just like more broad-based, less applicable to the day-to-day. So hope that helps.
What college did you go to?
I went to Minnesota.
Oh.
Wolverine.
Whoa.
No, Golden Gopher.
Did they
Well,
have an
Michigan
actuarial
Rock.
program, or,
Hold on, I'm sorry,
or
what?
did you just?
I just majored in math. They did
Minnesota
not have a dedicated degree.
Majored in math.
Checks
Did you
out.
say Minnesota?
You just go through the list.
Oh, I heard Michigan for whatever stupid
Oh yeah,
reason.
no, sorry, yeah.
No,
Minnesota
if we have the
Golden
phonics for reading, what we need to do is we need to figure out how to teach math, and I don't think we know here how to teach math.
Well, we're on a third method for the last century, because I heard John McWhorter talking about this one. It's like, the way that I learned math was the old new math, and now they're on the new math.
Wait, so we're beyond Common Core?
Well, it just
now?
The Common Core looks
general-
really
That covered
stupid.
everything, right?
generational
Common Core.
methods for how they teach mathematics are different. I remember I had a calculus professor who said, the way that we teach math in this country is wrong, that it's like recipes in a cookbook. It should be like a child banging on a piano and finding out what sounds the notes make. That's how you learn math, by
Good, that's
experimenting
quite
with
sensible,
numbers.
yeah.
But I had, I suppose, 2 questions.
Of course, you've got to have some Chinese genes to begin that process.
Is
You and
Taiwan
Victor together.
Chinese?
You and
Of course
Victor.
it's Chinese.
I'm asking Gabe.
Was Pythagoras Chinese? I don't know.
I'm not going to
Leibniz?
say anything on this particular
I
There
want to
was-
see Gabe versus. No, I'm just joking.
listen,
Gabe versus.
listen, Pythagoras was
I'm
not
fucking around.
Pythagoras was not Chinese. He was Greek.
Last time I checked.
Just for the benefit of people who went to a Chicago public school. But there is a book in existence, a published book called "Was Pythagoras Chinese?" And the question is, of course,
Did he learn it from the Silk Road?
no.
Just
no.
asking questions.
No, the question is, can you find in ancient Chinese mathematical discussions the Pythagorean theorem about the sum of the
Okay.
of the
I would
two other
assume you
angles,
can,
you
can't
know,
you?
equaling the square on the hypotenuse.
I assume you can.
And
Or can't you?
according to this book, you could.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was a controversial, I think.
Interestingly, when I was learning arithmetic, because I went to one of the Montessori schools in Naperville, we like learned some of it with an abacus. Interestingly,
Oh, really?
Mm.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I think like looking back now
I
and
did that at
talking
Montessori
to,
school in Evanston when I was like 5.
okay, so it must have been a pretty
But back then Montessori
Widespread
didn't go
Montessori thing.
very high. It only went up
Yeah.
to kindergarten, first, second at the most, you know.
yeah.
You know,
Now some of them go through high school.
I suddenly had a flash of a conversation I had once, and this would have been, I don't know, in the 70s, and I met someone who argued that the Russians had not really put up Sputnik or something like that, and I said, "Oh, why do you think that?" And by the way, in those days, I did not flatter myself that I had a broad cultural education. And he said, well, I saw this thing on TV, and it showed these Soviet scientists, and they were sitting there using an abacus. And I said, there's 1 or 2 things you don't know. Right.
Well, were there any American scientists using an abacus when we landed?
Well, no, it's not part of the American tradition, but the point is an abacus is, for those who are used to it, is extremely useful as a calculator.
Oh, it's very efficient.
It's just like
yeah.
scratch paper.
Yeah.
It's just part of your muscle memory. I have a very narrowly...
Is that? Sorry, go ahead.
I have a narrowly I know it's getting close to 11 p.m. I have a narrowly biographical and historical question for our host, unless the room doesn't want to entertain it, because we were sort of on that bit of 60s and 70s Britain earlier. And I have a public welfare and economics question that might get back to the original topic for the evening.
Can we do the welfare question first?
Yeah. If you're willing to do it.
I mean, can we?
Dick, Dave, Karina?
I'm listening.
All right.
I'm listening.
Good people, Ollie.
Well, all ears.
So,
You wouldn't know that though, because you're not here often enough.
I am but a cipher. I'm a free agent.
He might actually be on the list. He just probably doesn't check his email often enough.
I have a
I'm
child
kidding, I'm kidding,
and a
I'm
wife
joking,
who
it's a
works
joke,
weekends. I don't.
Before
get
you
it.
go,
impossible to get on the list?
you should
So-
both make sure that
Yeah,
you're on the list
yeah.
to get notifications for
All
this
right,
seminar.
pip pip tally ho. So one economist whose work I have enjoyed, who's not a libertarian, but he was a convert to pro-market arguments. The late Janos Kornai
Oh yeah,
from
yeah.
Hungary, who
Great
died
book on socialism. Yeah.
just a couple years ago. Wrote many books on socialism. He was from behind the Iron Curtain. His autobiography is excellent, very informative. It's summarizing a lot of his arguments, and this is a tip to all of you out there watching online. The autobiography of a great author can sometimes, or of a great intellectual, can serve as sometimes a good summary of some of their work. If you'd like that as a cheat sheet and from where to investigate further, and this is how I look back on this book now, 20 years after I published it, and so on and so forth. But I gave a presentation on him, one of the only I gave at College of Complexes.
Oh, I saw that and I missed it. Yeah.
But the grainy video is online.
I thought the speaker was an unknown person, so
That's
I thought,
right.
I won't bother with that.
He's a cipher. He doesn't show up often. And one of the things he wrote about that was the central thesis of his critique of of the Soviet-style socialism.
Yeah.
I'm gonna specify that compared to, say, Western European welfare state. Was that he took innovations because he got so disgusted with communist, Marxist, Leninist style propaganda and economics from behind the Iron Curtain, that he was not invested in the same rivalries in the Western schools of thought. To him, that was all the breath of fresh air on the other side of the Iron Curtain. So he borrowed very freely from the spectrum of social democrats and Keynesians over to Austrian economics and Friedmanites and that sort of thing. Without feeling like he was stepping on anyone's toes. It's like he was going to a grocery store with all these new ingredients of great ideas that he could borrow from. So he took some things in his critique of socialism from the Austrian economists, or his critique of communist-style rule, if I'm going to specify that, and he took others from Keynes even. He said, well, Keynes was looking at the recurring problem being unemployment, because he's writing at that period where that's the peak thing, and instead, for him, writing after World War II in Eastern Europe, and from time to time when he's allowed to study abroad or teach abroad, because he wasn't allowed to have students in Hungary until after the fall of the Iron Curtain, that shortages were the main problem. And how could he account for shortages? Okay, and he spends large part of his career working on this. And it comes down to a couple of mechanisms like the soft budget constraint, as he calls it, that nothing, when they take over these heavy industries, nothing is allowed to really go broke, and then other things that have to do with just the physical realities of, and he had even worked as a accountant or something in some factories in Hungary for a while when he was younger, that they're, well, we can't build anything because we don't have raw materials. It's not just that we're lazy, we don't have steel, and we don't have cloth, and we don't have lumber. What do you want me to do? And he had all of these different insights. And then after the fall of communism, when he's older, he continued revisiting some of his ideas. And I tried to get up at, I think this is against either Charlie Paddock or Andy Anderson at the College of Complexes. Like, oh, what about the failures of capitalism? And
Charlie
he wrote
Dana.
some more papers after his retirement. He wrote pretty much up to the end of the 2010s. And one of them that I remember reading that was written probably around the time of the Great Recession, one or two papers, he was revisiting the soft budget constraint. One I think was an article specifically about healthcare, and the other was the soft budget constraint in general. And he said one that I think a lot of libertarian-minded people would understand was, okay, so I looked at the soft budget constraint when it came to the Soviet-style system. Does that same principle apply anywhere else? He said, well, we definitely see it with investment banking as of the Great Recession. But the other one he talked about was hospitals. He said, I have looked at this across every economic system in the world. There is no economic system in the world where hospitals run at anything other than a loss. Not private, not public, not mixed. And I don't know how we're going to solve that with market solutions, welfare state solutions, or whatever, but there is no getting around this fact. Hospitals are not profitable anywhere. So, that was a couple things. He also took a final swing at Viktor Orban for throwing out the university in Budapest and sending it to, and he took a final swing at China because he had advised the government in the 80s, and his final article, which was published in the Wall Street Journal, was, when I gave advice to the Hungarian government, which had oppressed me, but they wanted a little advice on free market mechanisms, and they were going to take it behind the scenes, the Hungarian Party was willing to introduce market mechanisms. You know, farmers could keep their surpluses and such. They joined the IMF, even though they were still run by the Communist Party for that final decade in power. But they were weak. They weren't going to get very big. China was this great power waiting to redevelop. And by injecting economic dynamism into the Communist Party of China, I may have created a Frankenstein's monster, or helped to create a
That's what
Kornai wrote
said
in like 2018 or 19. I think it was one of his last public statements before he passed away a couple years after that. So that was a couple of ideas of his, but just in terms of the public sector versus, you know, he went article after article or book after book saying, and I went toe-to-toe with Charlie Paydock on some of this, like, we're not talking about just a kid who can't afford lunch getting food stamps. This is owning 85% of the economy in government hands. It's owning, you know, the entire steel industry and the entire coal industry and something like that.
You have taught, like, I know about him because of you. And one of the things you told me was he kind of almost has like a detached. He has no sort of like assumptions going into studying the stuff. It's like he's taking like he has no bias going into why do communist or socialist economies fail.
Well, he doesn't have a dog in the fight of the Western countries, different political parties really, because he's coming at it as the outside man, escaping to it, basically.
All right.
But
We're all subjective.
what were you saying, Uncle Justin?
I think I was just trying to frame it more. But did he know Hayek? Did Hayek know him? Did they cross-pollinate? Did they?
I don't know if he met. I know he met Friedman.
He mentions Mises.
And he's mentioned Mises and Bombavark. He was reading Bombavark on the sneak in the 50s when he was starting to have doubts. Naughty.
Yeah, he's a very interesting character. I only know him mainly because you have brought me to his attention. His I think if you're making a movie of his life, it'd be pretty interesting.
Well, we'll have to see about that.
Well,
This is a guy who loves Dr. Zhivago, so.
And he said that if he were to be in a Western
need to
country,
go.
he said...
Joseph, good to see you,
For
buddy.
about
I'm
18
getting,
years, he split
good to
time
see you.
between
I'm
the
getting,
States and Budapest. He taught at
Thanks for
Harvard
coming.
for a semester.
Sorry, I
And
was
was
late.
doing research in Budapest
See you
for a
soon.
semester until he retired.
You can knock that away, that's fine, we can put it back.
He said he'd probably be kind of a moderate Democrat by American standards. Have a good evening, good sir. But for a moderate Democrat to basically make his career on like, dude, central planning will never, ever, ever work. Believe me, I've tried. I've been in the office where we tried to make it work in the 50s. I spent the whole 60s doing math projections of why it couldn't work. I spent the whole 70s researching why it couldn't work on a microeconomic basis, and the whole 80s comparing it across the Soviet, system around the style system around the world. I mean, he's a pretty trenchant critic that is a little more vigorous than, say, Mike Quigley.
And
You're
he's
gonna
not
say he's a moderate Democrat.
He's not an economist by trade, right? It was kind of like he fell into it, right?
Kornai, his interesting thing was because he was a Holocaust survivor, his German-style schooling was interrupted first by anti-Semitic policies and dictatorships and stuff, being on the lam from the Wehrmacht for several months near the end. But then he became a reporter, kind of like David was describing. This is a youthful apprentice to a reporter, and then when he was kicked out of journalism for critical reporting on the new Hungarian communist regime, he sort of leapfrogged over university to, it was sort of centrally government licensed graduate studies to get his economics degree. So he did his research on centralization and planning and how it already wasn't working so well, and he has the story in his book of, I was defending my dissertation, which is public. It's like usually 10, 20 people show up. You know, they announce this in the local newsletter, like such and such a student will be defending his doctorate. And he said, I was defending mine on the failures of central planning. And I had hundreds of people come to my meeting because it's just before the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. So there was already something in the atmosphere, and that people had already been rebelling against the post-war purges that had happened.
And they kept him around.
Well, they wouldn't let him teach, but they eventually figured it might make them look good to let him travel abroad, especially if they tailed him to see if he was talking to anyone he shouldn't be talking to. And
Yeah, well, I know he talked to Epstein.
To the secret police. Yeah, well, because he taught at MIT.
Right.
Where the late Mr. Epstein liked.
Oh, he actually talked to Epstein?
Or no, he didn't. He taught at Harvard. His book was published through MIT. That was what.
But I mean, a lot of people talk to Epstein, though. That's kind of the. I doubt that our friend Janusz Korzai was a pervert.
If he was on the island, I'd be real sad. But you know, I would admit that would dim my view of him. His intellectual arguments on economics and the comparisons between the Soviet system and Western-style mixed capitalism, I think, are very rewarding, as well as his life story and his perspective on that, and taking it beyond just the fall of the Soviet bloc, kind of up to the final chapter, him looking somewhat in shock at 21st century China as, I don't know if I feel great about giving Wall Street-style dynamism to the Communist Party of China, but I may have helped make that into a reality. And his look at what was happening with authoritarian revival in Eastern Europe, because that was so disturbing, because it was Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary were the three most hopeful, you know.
I just find it interesting. We keep trying to steer back to China.
Actually,
That's the topic of the night.
Total aside, 2025, Poland did very well.
Yeah.
I hear Poland's very underrated.
In the last year, as somebody who owns an ETF, Poland was pretty successful.
You're talking about their economic performance?
Well, I'm talking about my ETF performance, which of course is
Well, that's a barometer. That's a barometer.
That's the only economic performance that matters.
Yep.
It's EPOL. EPOL is the ETF, and
Anybody want wine?
no, thank you. If I can say so myself, I was quite
I'm
satisfied.
good, thank you.
I used to have coworkers. They were Belarusians. They had work permits to work in Poland, so they worked in Warsaw. They probably went home or on the weekend and went back there, or every other weekend. So they're just going back and forth. You only go from less developed country to go to more developed country to work, right? So that's indication Poland or Warsaw is a draw from people around, for countries around that country.
Well, I wasn't referring to their economic performance so much, just because they've turned that corner. But
As I said, it
the
was an
authoritarian
aside.
revivalism, you know, which I think Hungary has the worst case, but there was sort of a pretty hard reactionary turn for a while in Poland, and at least one of the recent presidents or prime ministers of the Czech Republic was sort of that version, you know, the sort of Czech Berlusconi, the Czech, you know.
Well, Polish
Babic,
people have
I think it was Babic or Babic was his name.
Polish people have a reputation as being very, very Catholic. So I don't know if they'd want to, have a I mean, like, they're very Catholic, so they have that other. John Paul was a hero. John Paul II was, you know.
They're anti-communist and anti-fascist.
Well, remember, they're Catholics. Poles and Irish have this in common. Their Catholicism is part of the national identity because they're ruled by non-Catholic neighboring empires. There you go, Uncle Janos.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there you go.
The big book, The Socialist System.
Janos, thank you.
Can't get it past David.
Right.
This guy's got a lot.
This is a library.
It's multiple libraries.
It's Chicago Library is a branch library of David Steele Library.
But yeah, if 2/3 of Poland had been ruled by, Prussian Lutherans and East Orthodox Russians, and only the South was ruled by the Catholic Austrian Empire, in much the way that their Catholicism against their non-Catholic rulers plays in, I think, in some way, kind of like...
They're extra hard at it.
I mean, even if it wasn't prescribed the way the Catholicism was for a while in Ireland, but where that's just part of the sticking point, where even once you have your national independence, you're still going to stick with it for generations longer than socioeconomically comparable neighbors.
It could be your identity. It could be like you identifying as a Catholic, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can testify to this, and even more so, given that I've researched my heritage and that I'm actually a descendant of English expatriates into the New World who, not only the Catholic expatriates, but Shakers and Presbyterians, Scotch-Irish. Like, I'm in the United States because of the English Civil Wars and because the king and kings and Parliament enforced the Church of England on everybody.
And also, you're in the United States because Catholics and Protestants could never get on for centuries, despite what some people say about people living together makes them automatically co-assimilate. It doesn't.
Automatically,
it doesn't.
Well, we're not bombing. I'm not bombing my Protestant brothers the way that they do it in like Northern
It's called
Ireland.
Mother Courage. You know, the 30-year war. Oh my gosh. Oh.
Well, the German Rhineland had that violence then, in the 30 Years' War, but they didn't continue massacring each other, Catholic and Protestant, the same way after.
But like the Catholics in the United States had to like really prove they really had to. They don't in Europe the Catholic Church is supported by the government in many countries, including Poland and whatever, Italy. So in the United States they actually had to the Catholic Church had to compete in the free market of religion,
or build
I
itself
grew up
from the
around
immigrant
Boston,
communities
which
that
was
believed
very Italian and very Irish.
And the Boston Catholics,
Cardinal Law was.
He's a POS, but to talk about the Catholic migration into Boston, Boston was
Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Protestant, Calvinist. We're gonna hang witches, burn witches, and then now it's like Irish
Boston
Catholic,
Celtics.
Mecca.
Exactly.
So I guess that speaks to. We were talking about maybe before the meeting started about religious minorities overtaking the.
Well, the Catholics were insufferable, so the Protestants moved out.
And also since, the time of my mother's birth and your birth, David, I mean, my mom had this perception that I think a lot of Kennedy voting families had at the time, even though hers was too right-wing and hated John Kennedy.
At the time?
At the time, and she was like, yeah, we had the ballot in school, and I was one of the only kids who voted for Nixon. But, there's this notion that, well, much like it's the Irish-American version of the Obama, yes, we can. Finally, from no Irish allowed to the White House, we've made it. And in a way that me growing up a generation later I did not have this perception that the typical Irish American woman was a cleaning lady, in a way that someone in the 1920s might have had that perception. You see the movie Johnny Dangerously with Michael Keaton and Joe Piscopo, gangster.
Directed by Amy Heckerling.
And he's got the Irish mother who's got a voice just like this, and she meets another woman who's got a voice just like that, who's a cleaning lady, like, you and me, we've got nothing in common, like, well, we both clean forests for a living, we're both good lookers, and neither one of us, forgive me, Eric and Gabe, neither one of us is Chinese. And that's the joke in the movie, and it's corny, but that sort of old-timey perception, or that when John Kennedy first ran for Congress, there was a bonus that you would give out to hire a cleaning lady to clean up your apartment before you had a fundraiser or a candidate appearance. And the joke that Chris Matthews made in his book was, these families didn't hire cleaning ladies, they raised them. But that's 1946. That's yesterday's news. Do you think the average Irish American is a day laborer who can't save 2 nickels? You know, the way that you have this sort of 19th century, even mid-20th century cartoon. And times change, and the experiences change. The only place you might see that is if they're fresh off the boat, undocumented Irish laborers working in San Francisco or something like that.
Or
Like
the
my old
gangs in New
upstairs
York.
neighbors.